The rain had started before I even reached the hospital. Not the soft, lazy kind of rain that soothes, but a steady, drumming downpour, sharp against the cracked pavement and guttered edges of the town's forgotten streets. My jacket clung to me, heavy with water, and I shivered, more from anticipation than cold. It had been years since anyone had been here. Years since anyone dared to step foot inside the Westbridge Hospital. The locals spoke of it in whispers, if they spoke of it at all. Stories of patients who vanished, doctors who disappeared, and a wing that no one entered twice. But I wasn't here for stories. I was here to see it for myself. The hospital loomed in the distance, its dark silhouette framed by the gray sky. Broken windows gaped like blackened teeth, and the paint on the walls peeled in long, curling strips. A faint metallic scent clung to the air, though I didn't yet know if it came from the rain-washed metal doors or from the building itself. The closer I got, the heavier the silence felt, as if the air was holding its breath. I pressed my hand against the cold metal of the main entrance. The door was locked, or at least it should have been, but rust had weakened the frame, and with a firm push, it groaned and gave way. Inside, the smell hit me fully, damp wood, mold, and something else, something I couldn't name. It lingered at the back of my throat, sour and thick. The lobby was enormous, far bigger than I had imagined. Broken tiles crunched underfoot, and the faint echo of dripping water rang through the emptiness. My footsteps sounded strange in the silence, too loud, too deliberate. I stopped and listened. Nothing, or maybe something. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper brushed against my ears. I froze, straining. There was again, a soft, shivering voice, almost pleading. I turned, but the lobby was empty. I told myself it was the wind or the rain tapping against the broken windows, but my heart had already started to race. My curiosity pushed me forward, deeper into the building. I passed a row of chairs, upturned and rotting, their cushions darkened with age and moisture. Dust motes swirled in the muted light, catching for a moment before drifting away like ghostly insects. The walls were scarred with cracks, water stains running like dark veins. Every step forward felt heavier than the last, as if the hospital itself was reluctant to let me in. The main corridor stretched out ahead, long and narrow, fading into shadows. Doors lined the hallway on either side, some hanging open, others sealed with rusted metal plates. I could see the remnants of what had once been a bustling place. Faded signs pointing to X-ray, physiotherapy, wards. The hand-painted letters were chipped and fading, yet somehow still readable, as if the hospital insisted on maintaining a memory of its past life. A distant sound made me stop again, a soft scraping, like someone dragging their fingers along the wall. I swallowed hard. It had to be rats. It had to. I tried to convince myself. But then I heard it again, coming from the opposite side of the hall. And this time, I could swear it was paired with a faint whisper, soft and almost human. "Help me," it said, but so quietly, I wasn't sure if I had imagined the words. I forced myself to move forward, gripping my flashlight tighter. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing old patient rooms, their doors hanging crookedly on rusted hinges. I peeked into one. Broken beds lay twisted, sheets soaked in years of neglect. A chair lay on its side, and a cracked porcelain sink stared at me like a pale, empty eye. I turned away quickly, not wanting to dwell on it, but the feeling of being watched had already begun to settle over me, heavy and unwelcome. The whispers continued, always just at the edge of hearing, always fading when I tried to locate them. I stepped into a small waiting area, the floor carpeted with debris and shattered glass. I could make out the shapes of old magazines scattered across the floor, their covers long since faded. The images of smiling nurses and stern doctors looking impossibly distant, almost mocking. I bent down to pick up one. It crumbled in my hands, dry and brittle, and then I heard it clearly, a single sharp gasp like a person startled in their sleep. I spun around. Empty hallway. My pulse thundered in my ears. I told myself to breathe, to calm down, but the hospital had a rhythm of its own, and it was impossible to tune out. Every creak of the ceiling, every drip of water, seemed magnified, deliberate, like the building was alive and observing me. I moved on, stepping carefully over a puddle that reflected the shattered ceiling tiles above. My flashlight flickered as I passed a door marked ICU. The letters were peeling, water-stained. I felt a sudden compulsion to look inside. The air was colder here, unnaturally cold, and it smelled faintly of antiseptic and rust. The room was empty, or so I thought. Then, in the corner, something moved. A shadow darting just out of reach of the light. I froze. My mind raced. Another rat? Perhaps. But the shape was too human, too deliberate. I told myself it was my imagination. I had been reading too many urban legends, letting fear shape shadows into monsters. I forced a laugh, shaking my head. But the laughter sounded wrong in the space, swallowed by the vast emptiness, echoing back at me distorted and hollow. As I moved further down the corridor, I noticed marks on the walls. Scratches, almost like claw marks, running in lines from floor to ceiling. Some were jagged and frantic. Others were deliberate, neat, almost ritualistic. The longer I stared, the more I felt a story behind them. A history I wasn't meant to uncover. A patient who had left them, perhaps, or someone who hadn't. The thought made my stomach churn, but curiosity kept me moving. I reached the end of the hallway and found a stairwell leading to the upper floors. The steps were slick with water, and each creak sounded like a scream. As I ascended, the whispers grew louder, closer, circling me. Yet when I spun around, I faced only darkness. The higher I went, the stronger the sense of being watched became. I felt eyes, thousands of them, following me from the shadows of broken ceiling tiles and shattered windows. By the time I reached the second floor, the rain outside had intensified, hammering against the walls and roof. Punctuating the silence with relentless percussion. The hallways here were narrower, tighter, the walls closing in as if the hospital was breathing around me. I saw old posters, reminders of hygiene and safety, curling at the edges. Their faded slogans, once reassuring, now seemed sinister. Your health is our priority. Who had they been trying to protect? A door at the end of the hall caught my attention. It was different from the others. Pristine in comparison, though stained with age and slightly ajar. A faint yellow light spilled from the crack, though there were no power sources anywhere. I approached hesitant, every instinct screaming to turn back, but my feet moved forward anyway. I peered inside. The room was empty. The light was gone. I blinked, and then I heard it, unmistakable this time. A whisper right behind me. Not from the hallway, not from the walls, but from somewhere closer, almost inside my head. Don't stay, it breathed. I spun, flashlight sweeping the hall. Nothing, just the peeling wallpaper and the sound of the rain outside. My chest tightened. I wanted to run, but I was rooted, half in fear, half in fascination. I told myself I had continued. I had come this far, and the hospital wouldn't tell me its secrets if I didn't move forward. The whispers had become a constant companion, soft, taunting, sometimes pleading. I wondered how many of the voices belonged to people long gone, trapped here by time and decay. Every step felt like stepping deeper into a story I wasn't meant to read. The further I went, the more I realized something about the hospital. It wasn't just abandoned. It was waiting for someone to wander its halls, someone to notice the whispers, the shadows, the traces of life that still lingered in the decay. I didn't know who or what was waiting, but the weight of it pressed down on me, heavy as the rain, cold as the steel railings I clutched for support. By the time I reached the old nurse's station, I could feel the damp, decaying wood under my fingertips. Papers, yellow with age, lay scattered across the desk. I picked one up, a patient log, the ink faded and running from years of water exposure. Names stared back at me, some crossed out, some annotated with cryptic notes. A chill ran down my spine. I didn't understand most of it, but the urgency, the fear embedded in the handwriting, was unmistakable. I leaned back against the counter, trying to steady my breath. The whispers hadn't stopped. If anything, they had grown more persistent, circling me, a tide of sound that promised revelation and terror in equal measure. And yet, somewhere deep in me, I knew I couldn't leave. Not yet. The hospital had drawn me in. Its secrets, its history, the faint echoes of life and death, had become a part of me the moment I crossed the threshold. Outside, the rain continued without pause, hammering the roof, turning the world into a gray blur of sound and water. Inside, I stood in the lobby of the Westbridge Hospital, surrounded by decay, haunted by voices, and beginning a journey that I knew would change me in ways I could not yet comprehend. I didn't yet know what waited for me in the deeper corridors, in the wards that had been sealed for decades, but I felt it. The hospital was alive, in its own way, and it had noticed me, and I had noticed it. The rain had eased slightly, leaving a heavy mist that wrapped the hospital in a gray haze. I stepped back outside, letting the chill wash over me. My jacket was soaked, my boots squelching with each step, but I needed to see more. Something had been drawing me toward the east wing of the hospital, the part no one spoke about, the wing that had been sealed for years. Windows up there were boarded haphazardly, were nailed unevenly, some panels missing, some rotting with age, the kind of place where shadows could live. I approached the wall, careful not to slip on the wet pavement, and leaned closer. My breath fogged the glass that wasn't boarded. I pressed my hand against the frame, the cold seeping into my skin, and squinted into the darkness inside. At first, there was nothing, just a faint outline of rooms, the decay, and the smell of wet wood and mold drifting out. Then I saw it, a face, just for a moment, in a broken window at the far end, pressed against the glass, pale and wet as if someone had been crying, or had been standing in the rain just inside. It wasn't solid, not fully formed, but the features were unmistakable, eyes wide, staring directly at me, lips parted in a silent plea. My chest tightened. I blinked. When my eyes opened again, the window was empty. I swallowed hard, trying to calm the sudden rush of adrenaline. It's just a reflection, I told myself. The rain, the light, shadows playing tricks. But the truth didn't settle in my stomach. It was more than that. Something had looked at me, and I had looked back. There was recognition there, a familiarity that chilled me. I didn't know how, but I knew it had been human once. I moved down the wall, peering into the next boarded window. At first, I saw only broken furniture, peeling wallpaper and darkness. Then another face. This one didn't move at first, just stared, a shadowy outline, features blurred, but unmistakably a face. I froze, my heart hammering, and it blinked, or maybe I blinked, and it was gone, vanished into the shadows like it had never been there. The whisper started again, softer this time, carried by the damp breeze, swirling around me, almost teasing. Go, stay, leave. I couldn't tell if the voices were inside my head or just around me, floating with the mist. My hand shook as I pressed my forehead against the cool wood of the boarded window, trying to understand. I could feel the pulse of the building, slow and deliberate, like it was breathing in time with me. I took a step back and surveyed the row of windows. Each board was nailed differently, some cracked, some completely missing. I could see inside parts of rooms where the rain had leaked into holes in the roof, water pooling on the floor, reflecting dim, warped shapes. And then I saw more faces. Not full faces, not fully human, but hints. The curve of a cheek, the glint of an eye, a mouth opening and closing silently. They appeared for only a heartbeat before disappearing, as if the hospital itself was playing tricks, or maybe protecting itself from me. I felt a shiver run down my spine. My rational mind tried to argue. It's shadows, it's old debris, it's your imagination. But every time I turned my eyes away and back, the shapes had moved, always watching, just out of reach, just at the edge of understanding. I pressed closer to another window, hands gripping the wet wood, eyes straining. The rainwater dripped into my hair, but I didn't notice. A whisper, closer now, slipped through the mist, not carried by wind or air, not a voice I could place outside myself. It came from somewhere inside my head. Please, it said, soft and urgent. I froze. My stomach lurched. My pulse thundered so loudly I thought it might betray me. I wanted to step back to run, but my feet were rooted to the sodden ground. I had to see. I had to know. I leaned closer to the window, the boards rough under my fingers, splintering into the palm of my hand. The interior was dark, lit only by the faint gray light of the storm. Then I saw movement, just a twitch, almost like a reflection caught in the water pooling on the floor inside. A figure moved toward the glass, but when I blinked, it stopped, frozen mid-step. I swallowed, my mouth dry. It felt alive. Alive in a way that wasn't right, for a building abandoned for decades. I moved down the line of windows, unable to stop myself. Each one seemed to hold a memory, a frozen moment of someone trapped behind the boards. Faces of patients, nurses, visitors maybe, faces pressed to glass, watching, waiting. My chest felt tight, my breathing uneven. I could feel their eyes on me even when I wasn't looking directly at them. Small pricks of awareness at the back of my neck, the sides of my head, a constant crawling sensation. At one window, I crouched and pressed my eye to a small gap between boards. A room, empty, but the shadows moved unnaturally. Something behind me seemed to stir, and I turned sharply, flashlight shaking in my hands. Nothing, but the feeling remained, prickling along my skin. I looked back to the window. The figure was there now, more defined. A child, I think, small, hunched, face pressed to the remaining glass, the eyes wide and unblinking. The mouth open as if to speak, but no sound came. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. I staggered back, trying to convince myself it had been a trick of the light, a reflection of my own soaked jacket, my own face. But the memory of those eyes stayed burned into my mind. I ran my hand over my wet hair and tried to shake it off. My heartbeat was loud in my ears. I realized I hadn't even been aware of my breathing until then. I didn't want to look back, but something compelled me to. The mist had thickened, curling around the hospital like smoke. And in one window at the far end, I saw a face staring back again. Adult this time. Hollow eyes, lips pressed together tight, pale in the muted light. It tilted its head slowly, almost studying me. I felt a pang of recognition, like a memory just out of reach. Something about the way it looked at me was familiar, intimate, and terrifying all at once. I swallowed and forced myself to move closer. The ground was slippery with mud and rainwater, my boots leaving deep impressions. Every step felt louder than the last. The figure blinked, or maybe I blinked, and was gone. I shook my head, trying to anchor myself in reality. This wasn't supposed to happen. Buildings don't watch. Boards don't breathe. Faces don't linger where no one is. But the next window confirmed it. Another figure. A woman this time, older, with hollowed eyes and a mouth curved in something like a sad smile. She raised a hand, almost beckoning me, and then she faded, leaving the gray mist and my own reflection. I pressed my hands to my knees and bent forward, breath coming out in short, ragged bursts. My mind tried to name it. Hallucination, exhaustion, rain-induced fever. But deep down, I knew it wasn't imagination. The hospital had them somehow, and it was showing me. I walked the length of the east wing, checking every boarded window, counting the appearances, though it was impossible to keep track. Every few steps brought another face, another fleeting glimpse, and with each one, the whispers grew louder in my head. Not words I could always understand, just tones, fragments of pleading, warning, sorrow. The air felt heavier with each glance. I could almost taste the dampness of fear, metallic and acrid. When I reached the last window, I pressed my forehead against the wood, trying to steady my mind. The mist clung to me, soaking through my jacket, curling around my arms like icy fingers. For a moment, everything stopped. No whispers, no faces, just the rain relentless and the silence that followed. Then, in the corner of the window, I saw a shape, smaller than the others, crouched, almost hidden, watching. I blinked. It was gone. I took a step back and realized how long I'd been standing there. How long I'd been staring into the boarded windows, chasing the faces that disappeared. My legs shook, my teeth chattered, and I felt the first real, raw wave of fear. Not fear of the hospital or the rain or the dark. Fear that I had crossed a line. Fear that whatever had been watching me had noticed me and wasn't going to let go. I turned, finally away from the wall, moving back toward the main entrance. The whispers faded slightly as I left the east wing behind, replaced by the dull patter of rain and the distant hum of the city, muted through fog and shadow. My mind raced, trying to process what I had seen. Faces that weren't human. Faces that were human but trapped, warped by something I couldn't name. And yet, even as I left, I knew I hadn't left them behind. I could feel them lingering, following me, peering from the boarded windows in memory and shadow. I didn't want to come back here, but a part of me already knew I would. The hospital had secrets it wanted me to see, faces it wanted me to acknowledge, and I had stared too long, breathed too deeply, listened too closely to turn away now. I walked back down the wet path, rain dripping from my hair into my eyes, and felt the eyes of the hospital on me still, watching, waiting, and I realized something chilling. They weren't just in the windows. They were in my head. The smell hit me before I even saw the door. A sharp, antiseptic tang, sour and metallic, cutting through the damp, musty odor that seemed to cling to the hospital walls. It was a smell that belonged to medicine cabinets, bleach, and the lingering ghosts of procedures done long ago. I stopped in the corridor, breath hitching, trying to place it. It was a faint trace. It was strong, invasive, filling my nose, crawling into my throat. Something was calling me, pulling me toward the surgery wing. I followed the scent like a compass, each step careful, deliberate. The rain had lightened, leaving droplets glimmering on the cracked tiles, reflecting the dull gray light that filtered through broken windows. My flashlight trembled in my hand, but I forced it steady. The hall grew narrower, walls streaked with water and rust, signs of years of neglect. And the smell got stronger, almost suffocating, pulling me forward with subtle insistence that was impossible to resist. The door to the surgery wing was ajar, hanging on rusted hinges. I pushed it slowly, the screech of metal echoing into the emptiness. Inside, the smell was overwhelming. It was no longer just antiseptic. It was coppery, metallic, like dry blood, mixed with chemicals I didn't recognize, sharp and bitter. My stomach turned, but my feet moved anyway, stepping onto cracked linoleum, littered with papers and fragments of old equipment. The room was enormous. Light from the storm outside filtered through the broken windows, faint and gray, revealing tables covered in dust and debris. Rusted surgical tools were scattered across them, some lying in pools of dark, dried liquid that glistened in the flashlight beam. Scissors, scalpels, clamps, tools that once saved lives, now just remnants of something else. Something wrong. I bent down to examine the table, my fingers hovering over a scalpel. Rust had eaten most of it, but the edge still gleamed unervingly sharp. I tried to imagine who had used these tools, what hands had held them, what faces had stared up in the cold, white light. I couldn't stop thinking about the patients, the people who had been here before, and what had happened to them. The smell pressed against me, insistent, almost alive, and I shivered. Then I saw it, a small book wedged between two metal trays. Leather-bound, edges curled, soaked in decades of moisture, but intact. I picked it up, wiping off the damp on my sleeve. It was a diary. The pages smelled of mold, dust, and something darker, almost metallic. I opened it carefully, the spine creaking. The handwriting inside was small, precise, neat in some places, frantic in others. The entry spoke of procedures, of experiments, notes on patients whose names were crossed out in strange patterns. Some entries described routine operations, but others hinted at something else, something the writer almost whispered in the margins, as if afraid to be caught. I read about a patient who wouldn't wake, who trembled uncontrollably under anesthesia, who screamed silently behind the mask. There were mentions of chemicals, injections, vials filled with dark liquids, and references to observing changes, mental, physical, something beyond explanation. I shivered, setting the diary down, but unable to pull my eyes away from it. The air felt colder here, the light dimmer, the shadows stretching in strange, unnatural ways. I could hear something faint, a scraping sound, like metal against metal. My pulse jumped. I wasn't alone. I told myself it was debris, maybe the wind moving through broken windows. But the sound grew, deliberate, coming closer. I turned my flashlight, sweeping across the room. The tables reflected the light strangely, long shadows forming across the floor. In one corner, a tray of tools seemed to vibrate subtly, as if anticipating my presence. I shook my head. My mind was playing tricks. That was it. My imagination. The rain, the mist, the decay. It was all conspiring to make me see things that weren't there. I bent down to look at one of the surgical trays. The tools were arranged, almost ritualistically. Scalpels lined up, clamps placed like markers, some resting in dark stains that I didn't want to identify. My stomach churned. This wasn't just a forgotten surgery wing. Something had been done here. Something deliberate, methodical, cruel. The diary in my hands was proof, but I couldn't make myself look away from the tools. Each one seemed to hum with memory, with the echo of hands that had held them, of screams I couldn't hear but felt vibrating through the room. I picked up the diary again, flipping to a page that made me pause. The handwriting was frantic, almost illegible. It described an experiment with a patient who had been injected repeatedly with an unknown serum. Notes about monitoring vitals, mental state, and response. Observations about eyes widening in terror. Voices becoming soft, pleading. The final note on the page simply said, "They never woke." My throat tightened. I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to steady my breathing. I couldn't stop thinking about those people, trapped here, recorded in obsessive detail by someone who had no intention of helping them. The antiseptic smell seemed thicker now, clinging to my skin, invading my thoughts. I could almost taste it, bitter and cold. I moved toward another table, flashlight illuminating more tools, more trays, more evidence of work done long ago. The diary slipped slightly in my grasp, and I caught it, pressing it to my chest. I felt a tug in the pit of my stomach, a nagging sense that I wasn't alone, that I was being observed. I spun, sweeping the light across the room again. Nothing. Just shadows, just rust, just the ghostly outline of old equipment. I knelt by a small cabinet, wiping away decades of dust to reveal vials, labels faded and illegible. Some were empty. Some contained a black, viscous liquid that swayed when I breathed too close. The smell hit me again, sharp, metallic, almost acidic. I recoiled, but curiosity pressed me forward. I lifted one carefully. Inside, I could swear I saw a shadow move, something small and fleeting, like a figure shifting under the surface. I dropped the vial immediately, heart racing. The diary slipped from my hands again, falling open to a new page. This one was different. The handwriting was larger, uneven, desperate. It described voices, whispered instructions, patients who spoke in tongues, the lights flickering, shadows moving independently. I read the words over and over, my mind trying to anchor itself. But the longer I read, the more I felt a presence behind me, just out of reach, watching, waiting. I turned sharply. Nothing. The room was empty. The shadows danced across the walls, the tools gleaming faintly, but no one was there. And yet, the sensation persisted. Eyes, watching me. Maybe not human eyes, but aware, intelligent. I swallowed hard, hands trembling, and forced myself to move toward the doorway. The smell of medicine followed me, seeping into my clothes, into my hair, into my very being. I glanced back one last time. On a table, the diary lay open. I could swear I saw the words shifting, rearranging themselves, forming messages I couldn't fully read, whispers almost audible at the edge of my hearing. I tore my eyes away, turned and stepped back into the corridor, heart still hammering, skin cold. The hospital seemed to exhale, a low creak that echoed to the floors, as if acknowledging my presence, my discovery. I walked slowly, trying to steady my mind. I kept the diary clutched against my chest, the smell of antiseptic lingering in my nose and my thoughts. I realized something I had been trying to deny. This place wasn't just abandoned. It remembered. It remembered the pain, the experiments, the people who had vanished within its walls. And now, in some subtle, invisible way, it was showing me. I paused in the hallway, listening. The rain had returned lightly, tapping on the windows, a dull accompaniment to the quiet hum of the building. No voices this time. No shadows moving unnaturally. but the memory of them was etched into my mind like a faint scar, and the smell of medicine lingered stubbornly, a reminder of what had occurred here. I realized I wasn't ready to leave. Part of me wanted to run, to escape the smell, the shadows, the diary, and the truth it contained. But curiosity, stubborn and reckless, pulled me forward. There were more rooms, more secrets, more faces. Perhaps the hospital had more to reveal, and I had already crossed a line I couldn't uncross. As I moved down the corridor, the diary pressed tightly against my chest, the smell of medicine thick and metallic, I understood that this wing, the surgery wing, the place where life had once been fought for and cruelly taken away, was alive in memory and in shadow. It whispered to me, it lingered, and I could feel it following me as I walked, a presence just at the edge of my perception. I paused at the threshold of another doorway. The diary felt heavier in my hands, as if it was aware I couldn't stop. The smell of medicine was strongest here, sharp and insistent, curling around my senses. I took a deep breath, forcing myself forward. Whatever lay beyond, I had to see. I had to know, and I did not know yet what I would find. The rain had returned, hard and unrelenting, hammering the hospital roof like a drumbeat that echoed through the empty halls. I had moved deeper into the building, drawn by the whispers, the shadows, and the diary that weighed heavily in my hands. Somewhere along the way, I had lost track of time. The daylight had faded hours ago, though I couldn't tell exactly when. Swallowed by the gray mist and the hospital's unyielding darkness, I realized with a sudden cold shock that I was trapped. The stairwell I had used to climb to this floor had collapsed in part, or maybe the rusted metal had shifted. The doors behind me were heavy, warped, and stuck, refusing my pushes, my kicks, my desperate yanks. I wasn't panicking yet. I wasn't sure why. It was just a door. I had doors at home that jammed in the winter, but this one didn't behave like that. It hummed, or maybe it groaned. My heartbeat roared over any other sound. I leaned against the door, breathing ragged, and tried to calm myself. It was just a storm, just an old hospital. I could wait for morning. I could find another exit. But the corridor had gone completely silent. The kind of silence that pressed into your ears, filling every hollow with the absence of sound, making you hyper-aware of your own pulse. Then I heard it, a cry, low at first, distant, almost like a whisper carried on the walls themselves. I froze, straining to listen. The sound grew sharper, more urgent, a wail, a pleading that seemed impossibly close. It came from nowhere and everywhere at once. I spun, flashlight cutting through the dark, illuminating peeling paint, puddles, overturned furniture, but no one, nothing. The hallway stretched empty, infinite in the dim light. "Hello," I called, my voice trembling, swallowed quickly by the roar of the rain. No answer, just a wail, closer now, echoing in the shadows, bouncing off walls, off ceilings, crawling over the floor. My chest tightened. I could feel it in my teeth, in the hollow of my stomach, the sound vibrating through me like cold metal. I tried to rationalize. Patient from the past, echoes of pain left in the building, someone trapped in the other wing, maybe another trespasser? But I knew there was no one here. It was me, just me, and yet the cries continued, impossibly near, impossibly real. I backed away from the door I had tried to open, fumbling with my flashlight, feeling along the walls. My hand grazed something wet. I recoiled, heart hammering. My fingers traced a thin trail of dark moisture on the wall, water from the rain, or something else? I couldn't tell. The smell hit me first. Iron, copper, old blood. My stomach churned. I swallowed hard. The diary felt heavier in my hands, almost burning against my chest. The wailing shifted. Now it was around me, circling, sometimes above, sometimes below. I felt the sound behind my shoulder, whispering, pleading, and yet no one was there. The air grew colder, icy against my skin through the wet jacket. My teeth chattered involuntarily. I felt like I was shrinking into space, small and exposed, with unseen eyes watching from every shadow. I tried to move, to find another way out, but the corridors had changed. The hospital had always been a maze, But now the walls felt closer, tighter. Doorways that had been open now appeared closed. Some doors I could have sworn weren't there before. I spun the flashlight wildly, and the beam caught something. A shadow that didn't belong. A figure crouched at the far end of the hall, dark, shapeless, but unmistakably human. I blinked. It vanished. I swallowed, trying to speak, to ground myself. It's just a storm. It's just a building. Nothing's real. But the crying didn't stop. In fact, it grew louder, and I felt it brush against my skin, a cold, wet sensation, almost like fingertips trailing down my arms. I spun again, flashlight cutting through the darkness. Shadows twisted in corners, the shape of chairs stretching into grotesque forms, the reflection of light in puddles making them seem alive. I stopped in the center of the hallway, heart racing, chest tight, and pressed the diary to my face. I whispered, barely audible, "Please, make it stop." I didn't even know if I was speaking to the building, to whatever was in it, or to myself. The cries changed, a strangled, choking sob, so near I could have sworn it was right behind me. I turned slowly. No one, but the cold pressure against my back made me spin again. Empty corridor, empty walls, and then I saw a movement in the corner of my eye, a bed, or what remained of one, rocking slightly, though there was no wind. I stared. The rocking stopped. Then a shadow detached from it, tall and thin, shifting toward me, edges wavering like smoke. My feet refused to move. I felt frozen, heart hammering against my ribs. My mind screamed at me to run, to do anything, but I was caught, suspended between disbelief and dread. The crying softened into a whisper, and I caught the words this time. "Don't stay," it hissed, soft and urgent. I staggered backward, nearly falling over the puddle, flashlight shaking in my hand. My mouth opened to answer, to scream, to speak, but no sound came. I realized with growing horror that the voice was inside me, not just in the air, not just in the shadows. It was inside my head, burrowing into thought, twisting memory. I tried to focus on something else. The diary, my breathing, anything. I leaned against the wall, pressing my forehead to the cool plaster, trying to anchor myself. The whispers circled, teasing, now many voices overlapping, rising and falling with impossible timing. Some sounded like children, small and high-pitched. Some like adults, mournful and hollow. They weren't forming words, just syllables, tones, cries, fragments of something I couldn't comprehend. And then I felt it, hands, small, insistent, brushing my arms, my back, trailing down my spine. I spun around, swinging the flashlight, and caught the beam on a shadow pressed against the far wall. No features, only outline, but undeniably there. It moved with intent, gliding closer, and I stumbled backward, heart racing, mouth dry. The cries intensified, a rising tide of sound, urgent and impossible to escape. I pressed myself against the wall, shaking, tears running down my cheeks. I whispered, "It's not real, it's not real." But the voices laughed, soft, cruel, echoing off the walls, repeating my own words in distorted tones. I tried to leave, to move toward the stairwell, the doors, anything. But the hallway stretched endlessly, turning corners I hadn't seen before, doors that shouldn't have existed. I was walking in circles, trapped in the dark maze of the hospital. The cries shifted again, clear this time. I recognized the voice, a child, or someone who had once been a child. "Please, help me." It came from directly above me. I looked up, but the ceiling was high, dark, empty. The sound fell to the floor, bouncing, impossible in proximity, and I realized it was surrounding me. There was no direction, no origin. It was here, inside the hospital, inside me, everywhere at once. Panic rose. I stumbled, falling on my knees in a puddle of water, hands pressed over my ears. But the sound penetrated anyway. I thought I could feel the walls closing in, the shadows pressing, the wet chill of something moving beneath the floor. I tried to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. The diary had fallen beside me, pages splayed open, wet with condensation, and I could swear the words had shifted again. Messages, warnings. I couldn't read them, couldn't understand, but I could feel their intent. Don't stay, don't listen, leave. I crawled, dragging myself along the wet floor, flashlight flickering, trying to reach a door that might open, some exit. But the cries followed me, growing more urgent, more insistent. And then, from somewhere impossibly close, a whisper, directly into my ear. Don't sleep here. I froze. My pulse was deafening. I realized that I hadn't blinked in minutes, hadn't moved except to crawl. The diary pressed into my side, wet and heavy. The shadows stretched and twined around me, creeping along walls and floor like dark water. And the sound, the wailing, the whispering, the pleading had become unbearable. I lay there, shivering, soaked, and thought about the people who had been here before me. Patients, doctors, nurses, whoever had come before had left fragments behind. Cries that lingered in the darkness, the smells, the shadows. And now I was one of them, a witness, trapped in the same dark pulse of the hospital, where time and space had no meaning, only the sound of the rain outside and the impossible proximity of invisible voices. I don't remember when I finally stopped moving. The rain outside slowed. The cries softened and exhaustion overtook me. My body collapsed against the floor, wet, cold, trembling. But the voices lingered, faintly, like a heartbeat just beneath my skull. And then, just before sleep claimed me, I heard one last whisper, soft, intimate, and unmistakable. Don't forget us. The elevator doors were rusted shut, though I could see the faint outline of the old panel through the grime. I pressed my hand against the metal, and it felt sticky, damp with age, the texture of rust and neglect clinging to my skin. The air around it was heavy, suffused with the smell of mold and old metal, and I felt a thrill of fear and curiosity, curling low in my stomach. The storm outside had softened to a drizzle, but the hospital itself seemed to hold a rain of its own, dripping from the ceiling in quiet, persistent rivulets. I found the service hatch on the side of the elevator, warped and splintering, and forced it open. It groaned, sending a shiver up my spine, and the darkness inside yawned at me, black and bottomless. My flashlight cut a thin cone into the void, revealing walls slick with water and rust. Cables hanging like vines from a forgotten jungle. The elevator shaft had been abandoned for decades, yet it called to me, promising to descend into parts of the hospital no one had touched, no one had remembered. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, feet careful on the wet metal. The wood paneling of the elevator car had long since rotted away, leaving only a skeletal frame. Each step echoed faintly in the shaft, bouncing off unseen walls, a lonely, hollow sound that made my skin crawl. I gripped the corroded railing, flashlight trembling in my hand, and let myself slide downward, leaning back against the cables for support. The smell of wet iron grew stronger as I descended, clinging to my clothes, to my hair, to my throat. I tried to remember if I had ever seen a working elevator this decrepit. I couldn't. The hospital had always seemed to hold secrets in its corners. But this was a living grave of machinery, hanging between floors, suspended in rot and shadow. Each creak and groan of the metal sent a shiver through my spine, and I imagined the long-ago operators, the patients who had waited here, pressed against the doors in anticipation or panic, unaware that this place was decaying silently around them. The walls of the shaft were covered in scratches, lines deep into the paint and plaster. Some ran in neat rows, others jagged and desperate, as if someone or something had clawed its way up or down over years of neglect. I leaned close to the wall, tracing a line with my fingertip, and the metal was wet, cold, almost alive. My chest tightened. I told myself it was just water, rain seeping from the roof. But the scratches, they felt intentional, like messages left behind, warnings I couldn't yet read. I took another step down, careful not to slip on the slick surface. My flashlight illuminated the floor below, revealing the first glimpse of the wing I had been seeking. The doors at the bottom were intact, though water-stained and swollen with age. Behind them lay a section of the hospital untouched by time, or perhaps untouched because no one survived long enough to enter. The air smelled different here, softer somehow, though still heavy with mildew. It was a liminal space, neither completely decayed nor entirely forgotten, suspended between memory and ruin. I pressed my face to the old elevator doors, listening. Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence, except for the faint drip of water somewhere beyond. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, loud and unsteady. It was that silence that drew me in, that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand straight. Not empty, but waiting, watching, patient. I forced the doors open, the wood and metal groaning, protesting decades of neglect. Beyond them, the untouched wing revealed itself, and I froze, breath caught in my chest. The hallway stretched before me, dimly lit by fractured windows, and the walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, curling like skin in the damp, cold air. Faded patterns hinted at the hospital's past, flowers and stripes that might once have been cheerful, now grotesque in their decay. Every curl of paper, every mold-streaked edge, seemed to pulse faintly in the light, alive in a way I couldn't explain. I stepped forward slowly, each footfall muffled by layers of dust and rot. The smell here was different from the elevator shaft, less metallic, more earthy, like wet paper and mildew. But beneath it something sharper, something that made the back of my throat sting. My flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing doors hanging slightly off their hinges, some ajar, some sealed. I wanted to open them all, to see what had been left behind, but my fingers itched with unease. Something didn't want me here. The silence was oppressive. I could hear my own breath, uneven, rasping in the empty wing. Every small sound, the scuff of my boots, the drip of water from the ceiling, the faint rustle of something I couldn't identify, made me startled. I told myself to focus, to move carefully, to remember that it was just an abandoned hospital, empty, silent, safe. And yet, as I moved down the corridor, I began to feel it, a presence, faint at first, like a brush of fabric against my shoulder when no one was there. I paused, holding my flashlight steady, scanning the peeling wallpaper, the broken doors, the shadowed corners. Nothing, just emptiness. But the feeling lingered, a subtle pressure at the edge of awareness, like being watched by eyes I couldn't see. I reached a corner and stopped. The hallway split. One path leading to what had once been patient rooms, the other toward a stairwell I hadn't known existed. The light from my flashlight caught on something on the wall. Scratch marks, old and jagged, trailing up toward the ceiling. I ran a finger along one line. The plaster was brittle, flaking under my touch, but the pattern was deliberate. Someone had left them here. Someone trapped or desperate or maybe insane. My chest tightened. I remembered the stories of the hospital, the vanished patients, the experiments, the staff who disappeared. Could they have left these marks? Or was it something else? Something that remained long after people were gone? I pressed onward, toward the patient rooms. The doors were warped, some barely hanging on their hinges, the smell growing sharper, almost chemical in its intensity. I hesitated before opening one. Inside, the decay was thick. Sheets crumbled in blackened piles on rusted bed frames, glass shattered on the floor, puddles reflecting the dull light from outside. I felt a cold draft brush my neck and spun quickly. Nothing, only shadows stretching unnaturally along the walls, folding into corners. I realized then that the wing was untouched in ways beyond neglect. Furniture hadn't been moved. Papers lay scattered, mold-stained and brittle. And in one room, a small leather-bound book caught my eye. It was resting on a desk, edges soaked, pages yellowed with age. I reached out, hesitant, and lifted it. The smell hit me immediately. Old paper, mildew, and something metallic, coppery, sharp. I opened it carefully. Handwriting, neat at first, then increasingly frantic, spilled across the pages. Notes on patients, on treatments, on experiments. I didn't read them closely yet, but the weight of history pressed down on me, almost physically. A sudden sound made me jump. A groan from the stairwell, faint, almost human. My flashlight swept toward it, illuminating nothing but peeling paint and shadows. My pulse surged. I told myself it was just the old building settling, metal contracting in the damp, cold air, but the sound repeated, lower this time, deliberate like a warning or a plea. I swallowed hard, clutching the diary closer, feeling the sweat prickling my neck despite the cold. I turned back to the hallway. The wallpaper seemed to shift in the light, patterns bending subtly, like flowers turning to watch me. I shook my head, forcing rationality into the fear rising like bile in my throat. I was imagining it. The storm outside, the forgotten wing, the smell of decay, all conspiring to make me see what wasn't there. I could do this. I could move through the hospital. I could survive. I pressed forward, taking careful steps along the warped floorboards, eyes flicking to every shadow, every corner, every peeling edge of wallpaper. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the building itself was aware of me, aware of my trespass, and marking it in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. The air seemed to thicken, making each breath a small struggle. I tried to focus, to steady myself, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting in the dark, just beyond the reach of my flashlight. By the time I reached the far end of the corridor, I realized I had been moving for longer than I thought. The untouched wing stretched endlessly, doors and shadows and peeling wallpaper repeating in an impossible loop. I pressed my hand to the wall, feeling the cold plaster, the thin layer of grime, and then I felt it, eyes just at the edge of my perception, watching me, waiting. My chest tightened, the hallway seemed to exhale, and for the first time, I understood the way of the hospital, the way it remembered everything that had happened within its walls, everything that had been left behind. I paused, flashlight trembling in my hand, and whispered to myself, almost prayer-like, I'm just exploring. I'm just exploring. It's just an old building. But the silence answered with nothing, thick and heavy, yet insistent, pressing into my ears, my skin, my thoughts. I realized then that the untouched wing was not merely abandoned. It was aware, and it had noticed me. I didn't plan to read the files. I only meant to pass through the records room, cut across it, and reach the stairwell on the other side. That was the idea. In abandoned places, you make plans like that to feel normal, to pretend you're not somewhere you shouldn't be. The door was already open, just a crack, enough for the smell to leak out. Old paper has a smell, not like books in a library. This was sharper, dusty, a little sour, like the air had been sealed too long and learned bad habits. It made my throat feel dry the moment I stepped inside. The room was narrow, with metal shelves running wall to wall. Most of them had collapsed. Files lay everywhere, spilled across the floor like leaves after a storm. Yellow folders, some torn, some swollen from water damage. Ink bleeding through paper in soft blue ghosts. My flashlight beam shook as I moved it. I told myself it was just the cold. I knelt and picked up the nearest folder. It came apart in my hands. The paper inside felt soft, almost wet, even though it was dry. I could see handwriting. Careful, old-fashioned, patient intake forms. Names, ages, dates. Most of the dates were from the 1970s and early 80s, back when the hospital was still running. I knew that much from the rumors. It closed after a series of scandals. Budget cuts, lawsuits. People said it was cursed. But people say that about everything that decays. I flipped through a few files. Broken bones, pneumonia, routine surgeries, normal suffering. The kind you expect in a place like this. Then I saw the red tab. It was the only one. The folder was thicker than the rest, tied with string that had been retied again and again. The label wasn't printed. It was written by hand. Patient 0. I actually laughed under my breath when I saw it. A nervous sound. Too loud in the quiet room. Patient 0 sounded dramatic, like something from a movie. I almost put it back. I should have, but my fingers were already pulling at the string. Inside were dozens of pages. Progress notes. Charts. Drawings made with crayons. The first page was an intake form. Name, Eli Harper age. 7 admitted. March 3rd, 1979 discharge. The discharge line was blank. That wasn't strange on its own. Some patients transferred. Some died. But the pages kept going. And going. Weekly notes. Monthly evaluations. Years of them. I skimmed at first. Symptoms listed in clean handwriting. Fever. Fatigue, night terrors, episodes of unresponsiveness, Notes about how the child would stare at walls for hours, how he claimed to hear voices from inside the building. One doctor wrote that Eli insisted the hospital was alive. I felt a small chill then, the kind you brush off. Kids say things, especially sick ones. I turned another page. There were drawings, crayon on white paper, a stick figure boy standing in a long hallway, doors with eyes drawn in windows, a black shape behind him, tall and thin, stretching from floor to ceiling. On the next drawing, the boy was gone. Only the hallway remained. I stood up slowly, suddenly aware of how quiet the room was. No wind, no rain, no distant city noise. Just the soft hum in my ears that comes when you realize you've been alone too long. I kept reading. As the years passed, the notes changed. The handwriting shifted. New doctors, new language, words like experimental and unapproved. One page mentioned isolation. Another mentioned sedation beyond recommended levels. Then there were the gaps. Weeks with no notes. Then months. Then years. The last dated entry was from 1991. Patient remained stable. Condition unchanged. Removal not advised. Removal, not discharge. Not transfer. Removal. The final page wasn't medical form. It was a loose sheet, folded in half. The writing was messy, rushed. If we leave him, it follows. If we move him, it spreads. The building contains it. The building remembers. I don't remember lowering myself back on the floor, but I was suddenly sitting among the scattered files, the folder open in my lap. My heart felt heavy, like it was sinking into something thick. I told myself it was nonsense. Fear layered over neglect. Doctors covering mistakes with strange language. It happens, but then I realized something else. Every file I had seen so far had an ending, even the ones where patients died. There was always a final note, a conclusion. Eli Harper's file didn't end. It just stopped. I became aware of a sound then. Not loud, not clear. Footsteps. I froze. The sound was slow, soft, like bare feet on tile, somewhere outside the room. I turned off my flashlight without thinking. The darkness pressed in instantly. My breath sounded too big. I held it, listening. The footsteps stopped. I waited, counted my heartbeats. 10, 20, nothing. I turned the light back on. The doorway was empty. I stood and backed out of the records room, keeping the light trained on the hall. The corridor beyond was long and straight, doors lining both sides. Their windows were dark. I told myself to leave, go back the way I came, but my feet didn't move right away. I felt watched, not in a sharp way, not like eyes burning into my back. It was softer, like a presence that had noticed me and was now waiting to see what I would do. I started walking. With every step, the feeling grew heavier. The air felt thicker, like walking through fog that wasn't there. My flashlight flickered once, then steadied. I passed a room with a cracked window. Inside, a hospital bed lay on its side. The mattress was gone. Straps still hung from the frame, stiff with age. I heard something behind me. Not footsteps this time. Breathing. Slow. Uneven. Too close. I spun around, flashlight swinging. The hall was empty, but the air behind me was colder. I could feel it on the back of my neck, like someone standing just out of reach. Hello. I whispered, hating how small my voice sounded. No answer. I walked faster. The breathing followed. Sometimes it sounded right behind my ear, sometimes far away, echoing down side corridors I couldn't see. I tried not to think about Eli, about a child who never left, about a building that contained something. Then I noticed the files. They were scattered in the hallway now. Papers I knew had been inside the records room lay across the floor, leading away from it, leading forward. My chest tightened. I hadn't dropped them. I was sure of that. I stepped over them, then stopped when I saw one page turn face up. It was a drawing, the same hallway I was standing in, drawn in crayon, and in the picture, a stick figure man held a flashlight. His face was just a circle, empty. Behind him was a darker shape, reaching out, I didn't run. I should have. But fear didn't come as panic. It came as weight, as certainty. I felt something walking with me then, matching my steps, not touching, just close enough that I could feel its attention, like a hand hovering inches from my back. I whispered again, I didn't know. The breathing stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, very softly, I heard a child's voice, not from the hall, not from any direction I could point to. It felt like it came from inside my head. You read my name. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The air grew warmer, heavy, familiar, like the smell of old paper and antiseptic mixed together. I'm still here, the voice said. Calm, almost tired. I walked. I don't remember deciding to. My legs moved on their own, carrying me toward the stairs, away from the records room, away from the files. The presence followed, patient and close, and I knew, deep down, with a certainty that made my stomach twist, that Eli Harper had never needed to leave the hospital. The hospital had needed him. And now that I had read his name, it knew me too. The hallway stretched before me, long and narrow, walls flaking with decades of neglect. I had left the records room behind. Eli Harper's name still echoing in my head, and every step I took seemed louder than it should have been. My flashlight beam cut a thin circle through the darkness, trembling slightly in my grip, illuminating peeling wallpaper, warped doors, and puddles reflecting the faint light like broken mirrors. The air was heavy. It smelled of mildew and rust, and something else I couldn't name, metallic and sharp. My own breath sounded loud, ragged in my ears, though I had tried to calm myself. The hospital was supposed to be abandoned, empty, silent, but it didn't feel that way anymore. The lights overhead flickered suddenly, buzzing and stuttering. I froze, heart jumping. One moment the corridor was lit by a dull yellow glow. The next it plunged into shadow so complete that I could barely see the floor at my feet. And then the light flickered again, catching the corner of my eye. Something moved. I spun my flashlight toward it. The beam sliced through the gloom, catching nothing. Just a long, empty hallway. But for a moment, just a fraction of a second, I saw it. A dark shape crouched low, sliding along the wall, impossible in the way it moved. There were no feet, no limbs clearly defined. Just a shadow, a ripple of darkness that didn't belong. I told myself it was my imagination, storm-fatigued, the strain of the abandoned hospital, and the story I'd already uncovered. I forced my heartbeat to slow, my hand to stop trembling. But then it happened again. The flickering lights came in quick bursts now, barely lasting long enough to register. And each time, shapes appeared, shapes at impossible angles, stretching and contorting in ways no human body should. One moment, a figure was slumped against a wall. The next, it stretched vertically, impossibly thin, like it had been yanked upward by something unseen. My stomach lurched, and I stumbled back a step. I whispered to myself, almost desperately, "It's just shadows, just shadows." But the shapes weren't shadows of furniture, of the peeling wallpaper. They had intent. They moved with purpose, always out of reach, just at the periphery of sight. And I began to notice them even when the lights held steady. Faint silhouettes darting along the edges of the hallway, lingering just long enough for me to sense them, then vanishing when I tried to look directly. My pace quickened, though I told myself I wasn't running. I had to see more, had to understand. Each door I passed seemed warped, bending inward like the building itself was breathing, shifting subtly under my gaze. The air had grown colder. My hands shook despite my attempts to hold the flashlight steady. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Tiny, deliberate, barely audible over the hum of the old hospital and my own rapid breathing. At first I thought it was my imagination, the echoes of my own steps. But they weren't mine. They were lighter, smaller, uneven in rhythm. A child's footsteps, or something pretending to be. I froze. The sound came from directly behind me, just a few paces away. I told myself to turn slowly, to look without making noise, but my body felt rooted in place. The beam of my flashlight swept the floor and walls, but there was nothing but shadows. Then the steps stopped. Silence. Absolute. thicker than before, pressing into my ears, my chest, my mind. I could feel it, something standing just beyond my perception. Not touching, not moving, just waiting. And I remember the drawings in Eli Harper's file. The stick figure boy, the shadow behind him. Following, I swallowed hard. My throat was dry, my hands trembling. I took a cautious step forward. Another step sounded behind me. Tiny, uneven, deliberate. Not hurried, not panicked. Just patient, watching, waiting. I forced my flashlight down the floor. Tried to see if there was someone crouched in the shadows. Nothing. Just a long corridor stretching endlessly, warped and familiar yet subtly wrong. I told myself to move faster, to escape the sensation, but my feet refused to hurry. My eyes kept flicking to the edges, catching shapes, flashes of movement, impossible angles. The hallway narrowed. The wallpaper flaked in long strips, curling toward the floor as if reaching for something. Shadows pulled in the corners, thick and viscous. I realized with creeping chill that the hallway itself seemed alive, bending around the shapes, amplifying them, making them impossible to pinpoint. Another flicker of the overhead lights. I caught a figure, a small child, crouched, faceless, limbs bent in unnatural angles. It wasn't solid, not fully, but it moved, and it moved toward me, slowly, gliding across the floor like water, impossibly fast in its approach and yet deliberate, silent except for the faint echo of the tiny steps. I stepped back. My heel hit something soft. A discarded file, paper splayed across the floor. My flashlight beam landed on it, revealing drawings, stick figures, shadow shapes, and at the bottom, written in messy crayon letters, "I'm here." I couldn't breathe. The figure moved again, closer this time. No sound, except in my head. A whisper, just a breath. Almost, "You saw me." I spun, the beam of the flashlight cutting to the corridor, seeking an origin. Empty, nothing. And then the footsteps returned. 1, 2, 3. Slow, deliberate. Following me. I took another step forward. So did they. Panic surged. I wanted to run. I told myself I could run, but my legs refused to obey. My mind was caught between disbelief and terror. This shouldn't exist. None of this should. Yet it was, and it knew I could see it. I kept moving, shuffling forward along the corridor, flashlight shaking in my hands. Each flicker of light revealed new shapes, always out of reach. Forms at the end of the hall, elongated and thin. Figures pressed against walls, melting into them, watching, and always the soft echo of tiny footsteps behind me, keeping pace, following, patient and unyielding. I passed the door that hung off its hinges. The light caught something inside. A shadow, not a shadow on the wall. A shadow on the floor, thick and black, stretching, moving independently of any light source. It slid across the threshold and into the hall, tracing a line beside me, mimicking my steps, a dark twin of my movement. I wanted to speak, to call out, but my voice was trapped in my throat, caught like a bird in a cage. I whispered Eli's name. My own voice sounded foreign to me, swallowed immediately by the thick air. The shadow froze for a heartbeat, then slid along again, matching my pace perfectly. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly. Every door looked like the one before. Every shadow was similar, yet subtly different. The shapes multiplied, flickering the corner of my eye, always just out of reach. The footsteps, tiny and deliberate, never ceased. I realized then I was not alone. Not in the sense I had thought before. Not just a presence or a haunting echo. Something or someone was walking with me, always, and it had been waiting, patient, for someone to notice, to acknowledge, to read the name that had been whispered into the building years ago. I pressed my back against the wall, hands trembling, flashlight trained forward. Every instinct screamed to turn and run, to leave the wing entirely, to abandon the hospital and never look back. But curiosity rooted me, compulsion, the need to see, to understand, to survive, perhaps by knowing what followed me. The footsteps shifted then. They grew lighter, faster, circling me. I spun, catching only glimpses of impossible angles, of shadows stretching and contorting in ways no human could manage. One shape paused at the edge of the flashlight beam, faceless, small, childlike, and then it vanished, leaving only the echo of a soft, fleeting whisper. "Don't leave yet." I stumbled, almost falling over a puddle. The hallway stretched on, no exit in sight, only the rhythm of tiny steps, the flicker of shadows, and the oppressive weight of being watched. I understood then, fully, that the hallway wasn't just a place. It was a witness, and it remembered. It remembered the child who never left. It remembered me, and it remembered the moment I acknowledged it, and it was not finished with me. I never expected to find anything at all in that room. The nurse's office was tucked away at the end of a crumbling hallway, behind a door so warped with age that it took me 3 tries to push it open. The hinges groaned like they were warning me, but curiosity had me ignoring every sound, every instinct telling me to turn back. Inside, dust hung thick in the air. It clung to my hair, my clothes, my lungs. Filing cabinets stood like sentinels, their drawers gaping open or hanging off their tracks, metal handles rusted, surfaces pocked with years of neglect. I ran my fingers over the desk nearest the window. The wood was rough, splintered, and damp in spots from leaks in the ceiling. Papers littered the surface, brittle and yellowed, some curled up into corners. And then I saw it, a small drawer, partially hidden beneath a layer of dust, half stuck, as if it hadn't been opened in decades. Something about it called to me. I knelt and tried the handle. It caught on the wood, then gave way with sharp click, sending a cloud of dust into the air. I coughed, waving it away, and leaned closer. Inside, nestled among bits of broken stationery and loose staples, lay a small, tattered diary. Its leather cover was cracked, pages frayed and curling. The edges were darkened from age and neglect. I picked it up carefully, the leather soft under my fingers, and blew off the thick layer of dust. It smelled like old paper, antiseptic, and something faintly metallic, like the tang of blood that had long since dried. I opened it. The handwriting was cramped, tight, meticulous at first, then increasingly hurried, more jagged as the pages went on. The first entry I read was simple, mundane even. Notes on the day, patient's conditions, temperatures, medications administered. But even here, a chill ran down my spine. There was a carefulness to the words, as if someone was writing not just for themselves, but for a record that would never be questioned. Then I reached a page that made my chest tighten. Room 12. He did not wake today. I left the light on for him. I hope he doesn't feel alone. My fingers froze on the page. I glanced around the office, at the peeling wallpaper, the long-forgotten charts pinned haphazardly to corkboards, and the thick layer of dust. The room felt colder somehow, more oppressive, as if the words had weight beyond paper and ink. I kept reading. The diary continued with entries that grew stranger, more cryptic. Room 5. She murmured in her sleep. I do not answer. The others hear. I do not want to hear. The light stays low. Room 17. He sits for hours, staring at nothing. I leave him alone. I do not touch him. The night is long. I began to notice a pattern. The nurse wrote of patients who never woke. Patients who lingered somewhere between sleep and oblivion, as if the hospital had claimed them before death did. There was no mention of discharges, no notes about recovery, only presence, only watching, only absence that filled the room. A sound made me start. Somewhere in the hall, a door creaked, long and slow, like someone stretching after a deep sleep. My flashlight flickered across the desk, across the floor, and I swallowed hard. The office felt smaller suddenly, more confined, as if the walls themselves had leaned in to listen. I forced myself back to the diary. I had to know more. I turned the pages carefully, each one more fragile than the last. There were sketches now, crude and unsettling. Faces, some smiling, some distorted. Figures lying in beds, sometimes with the nurses looming over them, sometimes with shadows stretching impossibly long behind the patients. One page had scribbles in the margins. They never leave. They don't want to leave. I set the diary in my lap and rubbed my eyes, trying to blink away the unease creeping up my spine. The hospital had always felt wrong. even in daylight. But here it was different. Quiet wasn't quiet anymore. It pressed against me. The room was empty. Yet I felt a gaze on the back of my neck, a weight in the air, like the walls themselves were watching. Another entry made me freeze. Room 3. He speaks my name. I do not answer. I cannot answer. I hear in the walls. I hear in the floor. I cannot sleep. I leave a light on. I hope it does not reach me. I swallowed. My pulse was loud in my ears. I tried to tell myself it was just an old nurse, writing strange things after long nights on shift, exhausted, haunted by illness and death. But the words pressed against my thoughts. There was a rhythm to them, a deliberate obsession that went beyond fatigue. I turned another page. Room 8. They follow me in the corridors. I see them in corners and reflections, in the shadows behind doors. I do not touch them. I do not speak. I leave the light on. I hope they rest when I leave. The air grew colder. I could feel it creeping under my jacket, down my neck, and I pulled it tighter around me. I glanced around the office again. Shadows pooled in the corners where my flashlight didn't reach. Shapes in the darkness that seemed almost wrong. I read on. Room 1. I can no longer tell if it is day or night. The patients who never woke whisper in the hallways. I hear their voices when I close my eyes. I hear my own name. I do not move. I cannot move. The light is my only protection. I press my hand to the diary, as if holding it would tether me to reality. My fingers shook. The words weren't just stories. They weren't just memories. They felt alive, like the nurse's fear had seeped into the paper, into the room itself. A sudden sound made me jerk. A faint shuffle, almost imperceptible, coming from somewhere in the office. I swung my flashlight, but there was nothing. Just the desk, the cabinets, the broken window letting in a gray, rainy light. I breathed out slowly. My imagination. That had to be it. Long hours alone in a dead hospital. Reading words meant to haunt me. It had to be. But then, as I turned another page, my stomach dropped. Room 6. I left the light on for him. When I returned, it was off. I did not touch the switch. I do not go near him at night. He knows I am here. He knows I saw him. The diary slipped from my hands. I caught it just in time. My fingers lingered over the page, tracing the words, feeling the weight of them. The rain outside tapped against the window, steady and soft, and yet inside the office, the air had changed. Heavy, watchful. I tried to close the diary, to put it back in the drawer and leave, but curiosity burned hotter than fear. I flipped the pages again, skimming faster now, noticing patterns, repeated phrases. I do not answer. I leave the light on. They never woke. I shivered. It felt like the room itself had grown smaller, walls leaning closer. The shadows in the corners moved, or maybe they only seemed to move when I blinked, but the feeling of being observed was unmistakable. A sound, soft, almost like a sigh, came from behind the desk. My flashlight swung, catching the empty floor, the cabinet, the peeling wallpaper. Nothing, but the sense of being followed persisted, a cold pressure at my back. I pressed the diary to my chest. I whispered aloud, though the room offered no answer. It's just words. Just words. I didn't believe it. Another entry made my blood run cold. Room 12. He waits. I can see him in the corners of my eyes. He knows I know. I leave the light on. I hope he sleeps when I do. I hear him in the walls. I hear him calling my name. I swallowed hard. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing just beyond the beam. Tall, thin, shadowed, and then it vanished. I forced myself to stand, diary clutched tightly. Every instinct screamed to leave, to run from the office, down the hallway, out of the hospital entirely. But I couldn't move at first. Fear had rooted me in place, and the words of nurse long dead echoed louder than the rain outside. He waits. He knows I know. I backed toward the door slowly, keeping my flashlight on the corners of the room. Dust swirled in the beam, catching on broken staples and shards of paper. Nothing moved, nothing except the light itself, flickering across the walls as if the room were breathing. Finally, I pushed the door open, the hinges groaning in protest. I stepped into the hallway, feeling the weight of the diary in my hands, the shadows behind me clinging like damp cloth. The hospital felt different now, quieter, thicker, watchful, and I knew, with a certainty that made my chest tighten, that some part of the nurse's fear had survived, lingered, and perhaps had found me. I didn't mean to read the names aloud. I really didn't. But the diary was in my lap, pages splayed across the cracked linoleum floor of the nurse's office, and my fingers kept tracing the letters, lingering over the words that chilled me to the bone. In a hushed whisper, almost instinctively, I said one, Eli Harper. It was quiet, just my voice. The rain outside drumming softly on the broken windows. The hospital air smelled of damp paper and rust, and my own heartbeat felt deafening in the sudden stillness. I told myself I was imagining it. Names don't make sounds on their own. Names don't echo. Names don't warn you. And then I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible rustle above my head, a faint whisper. I froze. My flashlight beam hovered over the desk, over the scattered papers, over the diary clutched in my hands. Eli, my stomach dropped. The voice had come from somewhere above me, high in a vent that ran along the ceiling. I had noticed it before, a metal grill half detached, its slats warped and bent from years of neglect. But I had assumed it was nothing more than an old ventilation system, the building settling, wind finding its way through cracks. Not now, Eli Harper. I swallowed hard, every nerve in my body alert. The voice wasn't harsh, wasn't loud. It was deliberate, soft, patient, exactly like the diary had described. Calm, almost tender. But beneath that calm, something darker lurked, a waiting that made my chest tighten. I jumped to my feet, the diary nearly slipping from my hands. I waved my flashlight toward the vent, expecting, hoping, there would be nothing. But the slats shivered. The metal hummed faintly, like a distant sigh. Eli, I choked on my breath. I whispered back, almost instinctively, I'm here. Silence. The kind of silence that presses into your ears, your lungs, your bones. I could hear my own heartbeat thrumming, loud, uneven, panicked. I told myself to calm down. I told myself it was just air moving through the ducts. Just an old building. Just nothing. I took a step toward the vent. The slats rattled again, and the whisper came back, clearer this time. You read my name. It wasn't coming from a single spot. It reverberated through the ducts, bouncing, twisting, as if the entire ventilation system was speaking directly into my head. My stomach knotted. The words weren't just floating in the air. They were inside me, pressing at my thoughts, curling around the edges of my mind. I stepped back, gripping the diary like a shield. My fingers trembled. The vent groaned, a low metallic moan, and then more voices joined in. Not loud, not chaotic, just layered, repeating the names I had read aloud, over and over, patient, insistent. Eli Harper, Eli Harper, Eli Harper. I couldn't stop the shiver crawling up my spine. I tried to speak, to say something back, to demand that it stop, but my throat was dry, tight. The voices were everywhere, inside the vent, behind the walls, echoing faintly in the peeling linoleum under my feet. I whispered another name from the diary, barely audible. Harper. The response came immediately, almost delighted, carried through the vent in a wave of soft sound. Yes, Harper. I stumbled backward, flashlight beams swinging wildly. Shadows leapt along the walls, warped and alive in the flickering light. I could feel the air move around me, a subtle current, as if something unseen was circling, waiting. I pressed my back against the wall, clutching the diary. Every instinct screamed to run, to escape the office, the wing, the hospital entirely. But the voices were patient, not demanding, not threatening. Yet their presence, calm as it was, pressed down on me like a weight, as if I had trespassed somewhere I was not meant to be. I tried to rationalize. Of course, the diary was old. Of course, the building was hollow. Acoustics, echoes my imagination. But the words, the way the voices repeated exactly the names I had read aloud, made my mind reel. That was no coincidence. That was recognition, awareness. Something in this hospital was alive in a way I hadn't yet understood. The whispers began to form sentences now, fragments, broken and uneven. You see me. You read my words. You can hear them too. My breath came fast. I told myself I was hallucinating. I told myself it was fear and fatigue and too many hours alone. But my body didn't believe it. Every hair on my arm stood on end. My teeth chattered slightly. I could feel the cold press of the vent above my head. Not cold in temperature, but in presence. The way a shadow leans closer, patient and deliberate. I turned the flashlight toward the ceiling again. The metal grill rattled lightly. I saw it move just a fraction, as if something had brushed against the slats from inside. The air above hummed faintly, and a new sound joined the whispers. Tiny, deliberate footsteps. I froze. My pulse thundered in my ears. Footsteps too light for an adult, uneven, almost hesitant, echoing faintly in the walls and ceiling. I whispered, voice trembling, "Who's there?" No answer, just repeated names, now joined by soft sighs, faint rustling, a sound like someone shifting in place above me. I edged toward the door, trying to ignore the sensation of being surrounded. The vent hummed, rattled, whispered, carried my own name back at me in fragments, teasing me with recognition, familiarity. I felt dizzy, unsteady, the world tilting slightly under the weight of unseen eyes. I tried speaking again, louder this time. "Stop! Just stop!" A moment of silence. Then a whisper. "You read my name. You can't leave now." I stumbled back into the desk, knocking over a stack of files. Papers flew across the floor, rustling, fluttering. My flashlight landed on one, illuminating a scribbled drawing. Stick figures. Shadows behind them. Faces too dark to see. A small figure crouched in a corner, head tilted, watching. I dropped the diary and bent over to pick up the papers. My hands were shaking violently. The footsteps continued, circling above me, always just out of sight, always patient, always aware. The whispers grew louder, layered now, multiple voices speaking at once, soft but insistent. "You see me. You hear me. You know me." I backed up toward the door. My flashlight beam swept the room, catching the peeling wallpaper, broken cabinets, dusty floors. Shadows seemed to move independently, shifting at the edges of my vision. Every flicker of light revealed something new, something I couldn't quite comprehend. I forced myself forward, hand on the doorknob. The vent rattled. A rush of cold air hit my face, carrying the faint smell of antiseptic, old paper, and something metallic, something alive. The voices whispered in harmony now, repeating every name I had read aloud, calling them out, pressing them into my mind, layering over each other. Eli Harper, room 12, Harper, Harper. I yanked the door open, stumbling into the hallway. My flashlight beam swung wildly across the walls. The corridor stretched empty, yet I could feel it. Something following. Patient, calm, watching, waiting. I forced myself to run. Not fast, but enough to put distance between the office and the vented whispers. My heart pounded, each step echoing in the long hallway. I glanced back once. The grill above the office rattled faintly, almost as if something had shifted inside. And then the voices returned, carried faintly down the hall. "You cannot leave. You know my name. You saw me." I didn't stop running until I reached the stairwell, breath ragged, hands shaking. The diary lay forgotten in the office. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Even now, after I've left that wing, after I've walked the empty halls and escaped to the street, I still hear it sometimes. A whisper in the vent, soft, patient, repeating my name or the names of those long forgotten. "You read my name." And I know that somewhere in that hospital, whatever lingers waits for the next time someone does the same, waits for recognition, waits for acknowledgement, waits for the names to be spoken aloud. I didn't notice the door at first. The hallway was narrow, flickering lights casting uneven shadows across peeling wallpaper and cracked tiles. My flashlight cut a thin circle of light, and every time it flickered, the shadows stretched, twisted, impossible angles appearing along the walls. I had been moving slowly, trying to make sense of the whispers, the vent, the diary, and then I saw it. A plain metal door, slightly ajar, with a small, opaque window smeared with grime. I shouldn't have opened it. I knew that instinctively, but something drew me closer. The air around the doorway felt heavier, thicker, like it had weight. I reached for the handle. It was cold, slick with something I couldn't identify. My fingers trembled as I pushed. The door didn't budge. I pushed harder. Nothing. I twisted the handle. It wouldn't turn. I felt it before I understood. I was trapped. The door wasn't stuck. It was locked from the other side. And there was no one there. No one could have locked it. The hospital had been abandoned for decades. I tried pulling, yanking, pushing again. Nothing. Panic bubbled up in my chest. My hand shook and my flashlight trembled, throwing my shadow in jagged, broken lines across the walls. Then I noticed the small window. The glass was smeared with dried blood. Not a puddle. Not thick. Just smears. Thin lines that looked deliberate. I raised the flashlight to it. My own reflection stared back, but it wasn't right. It mimicked me. Yes, my posture, my flashlight, but the eyes were off. Darker, sunken, too deep. My skin seemed pallid, almost gray, and there was a subtle twist in my expression, a curl of the lips that I hadn't made. I blinked. The reflection blinked a moment later, but the movement was wrong. Slightly delayed, slightly wrong. A shiver ran down my spine. I shook my head, forcing myself to breathe. "It's just a reflection," I whispered. "Just a reflection." But the image didn't mimic me anymore. It grinned, a slow, crooked smile, one I hadn't made. I dropped my flashlight for a moment, my hands frozen to my sides. The beam landed on the mirror again. The smile remained, and then it moved. The head tilting away my neck could not. I stumbled back, almost tripping over a discarded gurney that lay half broken on the floor. My flashlight flickered wildly, shadows leaping across the walls, and I realized I couldn't tear my eyes away from the mirror. The room felt smaller now, pressing in from all sides. I forced myself to approach, careful, feet trembling. I raised my flashlight again, illuminating the mirror fully. The reflection mirrored the light beam, but the rest of it was wrong. My arms weren't quite right, the angles off, shadows in places shadows shouldn't be, and the blood smears on the glass were moving, slow, subtle, curling, like black smoke across the surface. I swallowed hard. My voice caught when I spoke. "This isn't real. None of this is real." The reflection tilted its head further, and for a moment I thought it whispered, not with words I could understand, but a movement of the lips, curling, forming sound that I felt in my chest rather than my ears. I backed away toward the door. My hands shook as I tried to pull the handle again. Nothing. The lock held firm. My flashlight trembled in my grip. Every instinct screamed to run, to smash the mirror, to do anything to escape this room. But fear had me rooted. The room itself felt alive. The smell changed suddenly. The faint metallic tang of the hospital floor, the dust, the mildew, all replaced by a heavier scent, coppery, sharp, the smell of blood fresh and thick. My breath came fast. My chest felt tight. And then I noticed the walls. They weren't solid. Not really. Shadows flickered inside the cracks, curling like smoke, stretching, twisting. For a moment, I saw shapes within them. Figures crouched, watching, waiting, shifting impossibly with the flicker of the light. I spun the flashlight toward the mirror again. The reflection had moved closer to the glass. I could see it now in full detail. Its eyes, dark, sunken, staring directly at me, and its smile, wider now, unnatural, the corners curling upward too far. I whispered, "I don't know who you are." The reflection tilted its head slowly, deliberately, as if it knew, and then it spoke, not in words I could hear, but in feeling, in understanding. My chest burned with the soundless voice. "You know me. You read the names. You cannot leave." I stumbled back, heart racing, hands fumbling along the edge of the desk. seeking anything to hold on to. The blood on the mirror swirled again, curling like ink in water, forming shapes that weren't quite human. Faces, too many faces, watching, waiting, silent screens painted in dried red. I tried the handle again, still locked. My flashlight beam shook across the room, catching another detail I hadn't noticed before. A small tray on the counter, rusted surgical tools, their edges blackened with age. And next to them, another smear of something dark, leading to the mirror, curling toward my reflection like fingers. I forced myself to look at the mirror again. My reflection, no, that thing, leaned forward slightly. The lips moved in mimicry, and then the eyes blinked in slow, deliberate motion, not in sync with mine. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming, heavy, pressing. I pressed my back to the wall, clutching the diary I had carried from the nurse's office. The pages rustled softly, echoing in the small room. I whispered aloud, "It's just a trick of the light, just shadows." But the mirror didn't respond. The blood smears grew darker, moving, spreading, and I realized I was being studied. My reflection, this creature, this wrong version of me, was learning, adjusting, waiting for my reaction. A movement in the corner of the room caught my eye. Something small, quick, a shadow, stretching impossibly, darted from wall to wall. The room felt alive now, shifting imperceptibly, corners bending, the floor tilting just slightly beneath me. Every breath I took echoed in the space, loud, panicked. I forced myself forward, hands shaking as I raised the flashlight. The reflection mimicked the movement, but wrong, delayed. Its eyes darkened further, the smile widening. I realized with a cold shock that the mirror wasn't reflecting me. It was recording me, observing, learning, replicating me. Wrong. I whispered another name from the diary, barely audible. Eli Harper. The mirror reacted immediately. The smile widened impossibly. The eyes followed me with intent, scanning, knowing, waiting. The blood swirls on the glass twisted, forming shapes I didn't want to see. Stick figure forms, shapes crouched in corners, shadows of children, all staring at me through the reflection. I stumbled backward toward the door, clutching the diary like a lifeline. The voices from events, the whispers, the tiny footsteps. They seemed to converge in a room now. Not outside, not distant. They were inside, echoing faintly in the walls, behind my skull, repeating names I had read, my name, Eli Harper. I tried the handle again. Locked. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. Panic rose like a tide. I could feel the room closing in, the shadows crawling along the walls, the mirror reflecting not me, but what I feared I had become. I forced myself to speak aloud. I don't belong here. I don't want this. The reflection leaned forward, dark eyes locked on mine. And for the first time, I felt a pulse, a rhythm in the glass, like a heartbeat matching my own, only slower, wrong, deliberate, waiting. I pressed my hands to the mirror, trembling. The glass was cold, solid, yet I could feel it somehow, an awareness, a presence, something inhuman pressing against me. And the whispers joined in soft, patient, layering over each other, almost intelligible. You could not leave. You read my name. You are here. I backed toward the wall, shaking, eyes never leaving the mirror. The blood smears pulsed faintly, curling like living things. Shadows writhed in the corners, small, thin figures crouched, watching, always watching. And then, as suddenly as it began, the whispers stopped. The footsteps vanished. The mirror remained, still silent. The smile faint, waiting. I didn't wait to see what came next. I sank to the floor against the wall, clutching the diary, breathing ragged. My reflection, or what had been my reflection, remained in the mirror, grinning faintly patient, knowing. And I realized with a sinking certainty that the hospital wasn't just abandoned. It wasn't just decayed. It remembered. And now it remembered me. The hallway beyond the locked treatment room felt colder than before, as if the air itself had thinned. My flashlight flickered in the shadows, sweeping over peeling paint, warped doors, and puddles of water that mirrored the broken ceiling lights above. I moved cautiously, my chest tight, every step echoing in the long, narrow corridor. I didn't intend to stop at the supply closet. I really didn't. But the metal cabinet door half open, with the word medication stamped in faded red letters, drew me in like a magnet. There was something about the way the shadows pooled inside, dark and thick, that made me pause. I knelt, placing my hand on the cold handle. The door creaked open, reluctant, releasing a faint metallic scent mixed with dust and something else. Something sweet, acrid, almost like chemicals I couldn't name. The cabinet was narrow but deep, shelves stacked haphazardly with bottles, vials, and boxes. Most empty, some half-crushed, all coated with a layer of dust thick enough to write my name in. And then I saw them. Vials. Small, clear glass, some still sealed, some corked with brittle stoppers. Each labeled in a neat, careful script. Code, really. Numbers, letters. Symbols I couldn't decipher at first. But I didn't need to understand the code to feel the weight of what I held. Some vials contained a dark, viscous substance, black as tar, swirling in strange patterns when I tilted them. Others were nearly empty, the liquid inside whispering faintly. I swear it whispered. I reached for one labeled simply 15-13. The glass was cold, slick. When I held it close, I thought I heard a faint sound, a soft, high-pitched moan, almost imperceptible, like someone screaming in the distance. I shook my head. My mind was tired, my nerves frayed. The hospital was playing tricks on me. But the sound came again, sharper this time. A tiny, desperate scream that seemed trapped inside the vial, echoing faintly, reverberating in my skull. I dropped it to the shelf with a trembling hand. The echo lingered, fading slowly, leaving only a ringing in my ears. I leaned in closer, flashlight beam trembling across the cabinet. There were dozens of vials. Some contained black residue, thick and uneven, as if something had coagulated inside. Others had a liquid that shimmered strangely, catching the light in ways that seemed wrong. The reflections on the glass didn't match the light exactly. Shadows twisted inside. Shapes flickered, moving without purpose, without reason, yet undeniably alive. I pulled out another vial, marked 4-07. I held it up, staring through the clear glass. A soft moan escaped, higher pitched now, desperate. I dropped it. It hit the shelf with a hollow clink, and the sound reverberated down the corridor like someone whispering my name. I felt the cabinet leaning toward me, as if it were alive. My own reflection flickered in the glass of the vials. Not quite mine. Slightly off. Shadows where shadows shouldn't be. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't alone. Not just in the hallway, not just in the cabinet, but in the building itself. Someone was watching me, waiting, patient, silent. I forced myself to breathe. The diary was tucked under my arm, pages crumpled from my grip. I had to see more. I had to know. I pulled another vial off the shelf. This one was smaller, labeled with a scrawled series of symbols I didn't recognize. I tilted it in the light. Inside, a black swirl rose and fell, pulsing slightly, as if it had a heartbeat. And then I heard it, a soft, muffled scream, as if someone were trapped inside, calling for help that would never come. My stomach lurched, and I dropped the vial again, spilling a thin streak of black residue across my fingers. It felt sticky, alive in a way that made my skin crawl. I wiped it off on my jacket, but the sensation lingered, a vibration in the air, a hum that seemed to come from the cabinet itself. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed darker now, pulling and twisting as if reacting to my presence. I couldn't look away, not entirely. Every vial I touched, every label I read, seemed to carry a whisper, a breath, a memory of something, someone that shouldn't exist anymore. And yet it was there, waiting. I pulled out a larger bottle, unmarked this time. The liquid inside was black, thick, almost solid, yet shifting slowly, curling and folding over itself. I held it to the light, and then I saw it. A face, just a glimpse, a small, pale face, mouth open, screaming silently. The liquid twisted, and the scream followed me, though no sound emerged from my own lips. I stumbled back, hitting the wall. My flashlight flickered violently, and I pressed it against my chest, knuckles white. The cabinet seemed to breathe. Shadows spilled from the shelves, reaching toward me in thin, curling fingers. I heard the whispers then, soft, patient, coming not from a vent this time, but from the cabinet itself. Words, names, fragments. Eli, room 12. Don't leave. I hear you. I stumbled back further, almost tripping over a box of old syringes. My hands shook so violently I dropped the flashlight. The beam danced across the ceiling, across the walls, across the vials again. Shadows moved inside the glass, stretching and twisting. Shapes crouched and pressed against the edges, watching. I forced myself to kneel, picking up a small vial labeled 9-21. I held it close to my face. The black liquid inside churned, and a whisper came directly into my mind. You shouldn't be here. My fingers shook. I dropped it. The vial hit the shelf and bounced slightly, black liquid sloshing. Shadows twisting, faint, desperate moans filling the air. The voices grew louder now, layered over each other, repeating the names I had read aloud from the diary. They weren't distant anymore. They were inside me, in my head, circling, pressing. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stand. The cabinet towered above me, like a living thing. I could feel it leaning toward me, shelves bending slightly, shadows crawling along its edges. Each vial seemed to watch me, pulse with awareness, scream with voices that should have died decades ago. I tried to step back, but the floor seemed to shift subtly, tilting just enough to unbalance me. I fell back against the wall, clutching the diary tightly. The voices in the vials whisper my name now, mingling with the tiny footsteps, the echoes, the shadow shapes I had already seen in the hallways. I forced myself to breathe. I had to calm down. I had to think. The vials were just containers. Chemicals, residue, forgotten experiments. It had to be. Logic, reason, sanity. I clung to them like a lifeline. But then I saw movement in one of the unmarked vials. A small figure, crouched, shifting, pressing against the inside of the glass. And then another, and another. Faces pressed into black liquid, mouths open, screaming, silent, echoing inside my skull. I realized then that the diary had been right, that the warnings were real, that every patient who never woke, every shadow in the hallways, every whisper in the vents was part of this, part of the hospital, part of the medicine itself. I stumbled back, tripping over a loose floorboard. My flashlight spun wildly, beam landing on a black residue smeared across the shelves, the vials, the wall. And I heard it again, clear, deliberate. You read the names. You open the drawer. You cannot leave yet. My pulse thundered. I scrambled to my feet, backing toward the door. Diary clutched to my chest. The cabinet seemed to stretch, shadows crawling along the shelves, the vials pulsing faintly. Faces twisting, screaming, watching. I fumbled with the handle. Locked. The lock wasn't physical. It was presence, awareness, something beyond me, beyond reason, pressing down, keeping me here. I pressed myself against the wall, trembling. The cabinet hummed faintly, a low vibration I felt in my bones. Whispers, soft, patient, layered with the tiny footsteps, the echoes, the names. Eli Harper, room 12, Harper, repeating in my head until I couldn't tell if they were outside me or inside. I realized, with sinking, bone-deep certainty, that whatever lingered in the hospital, the vials, the shadows, the whispers, was waiting for recognition, waiting for acknowledgement, waiting for someone to read the names aloud, to see the black liquid, to feel the presence of what had been trapped inside these walls for decades. And I had, and now I was trapped with it. The thought came suddenly, sharp and clear, cutting through the noise in my head. It wasn't bravery. It wasn't confidence. It was survival. The kind that crawls up from your stomach when something inside you realizes it's already too late if you don't move now. I backed away from the medicine cabinet. Slow at first, then faster. My heel caught on something and I nearly fell. But I didn't stop. I turned and ran into the hallway. My footsteps loud, clumsy, echoing too much for a place that had been silent for so long. The hallway looked wrong. I had come through this way minutes ago. I was sure of it. The walls had been pale green, chipped and stained, with a long crack running along the left side like a scar. Now the walls were yellowed, the paint bubbling, the crack gone. The lights overhead flickered, buzzing low, and the floor sloped slightly downward, like the building was sagging under its own weight. I slowed, breathing hard. No! I whispered, mostly to myself. I took a few careful steps forward. Each one felt heavier than the last, like the air was thickening. My flashlight beam stretched too far, then not far enough. Shadows moved where nothing should be moving. Then I heard it. My name. It came from far down the hall, soft and uncertain, like someone calling from another room. The voice sounded familiar, too familiar. I froze. I didn't answer. I knew better than that. But my heart started racing anyway, because the voice sounded like someone I used to know, someone from before all this, someone who should not be here. I turned left at the next corner, hoping to find the stairwell. Instead, I found another hallway, longer, narrower, lined with doors on both sides. Every door was slightly open. I stopped walking. The air felt colder here, still, heavy. I could hear my own breathing, the slow drip of water somewhere, and underneath it all, a low hum that reminded me of the cabinet, of the vials, of something alive but trapped. I stepped forward again. As I passed the first door, it creaked wider on its own. Inside was a patient room. Empty bed, torn sheets, rusted floor stand. The walls were scratched, deep marks carved into paint, like someone had tried to climb out. I didn't look inside the next room, or the one after that. I kept my eyes forward, focused on the end of the hallway. It never got closer, no matter how long I walked. The end stayed the same distance away. The lights above me blinked out one by one, plunging sections of the hall into darkness behind me. When I glanced back, the hallway I just walked through was gone, replaced by a solid wall. My chest tightened. I turned around fully, heart pounding. The wall was real, cold, cracked, as if it had always been there. Okay, I muttered. Okay, that's fine. I laughed once, short and shaky, then stopped. The sound felt wrong, like the building had listened too closely. I turned back around. The hallway was different again. The doors were gone. In their place were long stretches of blank wall, broken only by vents near the ceiling. From inside the vents came a faint whispering, overlapping voices speaking too softly to understand, except for one word. My name. I pressed my hands over my ears and walked faster. The floor creaked beneath me, boards bending like they might give way. The whispers grew louder, closer, as if following just behind my shoulders. You can stop now, a voice said gently. I didn't turn around. Another voice joined it. Then another. Different tones, different ages, all say my name, all sounding tired, sad, expectant. I broke into a run. The hallway twisted sharply to the right, then left, then right again, corners coming too fast. I slammed my shoulder into a wall, pain flaring, but I didn't slow down. My lungs burned. My legs shook. I burst into what should have been the main lobby, but it wasn't. The ceiling was too low. The desk was gone. In its place stood a row of hospital beds, each one occupied. Every patient was facing away from me. Their bodies were thin, unnatural shapes under stained sheets. Tubes and wires ran from their arms into the floor, disappearing into cracks and tiles. The machines beside them hummed softly. Screens dark. I took one step back. A head turned. Slowly. Too slowly. I didn't see the face. I didn't need to. The movement alone sent a wave of cold through my body. I ran again, past the beds, past reaching hands that never quite touched me. I burst through a set of double doors and nearly fell down a short flight of stairs. The stairwell spiraled downward. I grabbed the railing, metal flaking under my grip, and started down. My footsteps echoed above and below me, overlapping, as if someone else was running too. Halfway down, the lights went out. I stopped, clinging to the railing in total darkness. My flashlight flickered, then came back on, weak but steady. The stairs below me were gone. Where they should have been was a flat wall of concrete, smooth and unbroken. Above me, the same. I was standing on a small landing, boxed in. The air was close here. Stale. It smelled like old metal and something organic. Something that had been sealed away for too long. I heard breathing. Not mine. It came from the walls. From the floor. From inside my head. "Just open the door," a child's voice whispered. I spun around. There was a door behind me now. Old wood, peeling paint. A small, square window at eye level, dark on the other side. Exit was painted across it in red letters, chipped and faded. My hands shook as I reached for the handle. Locked. I rattled it harder. Nothing. The voices grew louder, gathering, filling the stairwell. Some begged. Some whispered. Some just breathed. "You can leave," one voice said, "or you can stay." The door vibrated slightly, like something was pressing against it from the other side. I leaned my forehead against the wood, eyes squeezed shut. My reflection stared back at me from the dark window, pale and distorted. For a moment, it smiled when I didn't. I pulled back with a gasp. "No," I said. "No, I'm not staying." The voices laughed softly. Not cruel, just knowing. The walls began to shift, concrete groaning, seams cracking. The stairwell stretched, lengthened, like it was breathing in. The door felt farther away, even though I hadn't moved. I grabbed the handle again and pulled with everything I had. It didn't open. Behind me, footsteps approached. Small, careful, stopping just short of touching me. I could feel the presence at my back. Cold, patient, waiting. I stood there, frozen between the door that wouldn't open and the thing that wanted me to turn around. And for the first time, I understood the choice wasn't really mine. The hospital didn't want me lost. It wanted me kept. And as the lights finally went out for good, I realized leaving and being taken might be the same thing. I opened the heavy door to the children's ward slowly, almost hesitating. The hinges creaked like they were warning me, or maybe complaining that someone had disturbed their sleep after so many years. The smell hit me first, dust, mildew, a faint sweetness that reminded me of old medicine and wax floors, something I could almost taste if I breathed too deeply. I swallowed hard. The room stretched before me, long and narrow, with rows of tiny beds lined up against the walls. Sheets hung in tatters, some crumpled as if a child had been tossed into them in the middle of play. Each mattress sagged under the weight of decades, yellowed and spotted, the springs groaning faintly under my feet as I stepped closer. Scattered across the floor were toys, left mid-play, a small wooden train, its paint chipped and faded, a doll missing an eye, her dress torn and dirty, a tiny wooden rocking horse tipped onto its side. They were arranged as if frozen in a moment long ago, and the thought made my stomach tighten. Someone had been here, and then they had just left. I knelt to inspect the doll, running my fingers over the rough fabric of her dress. I imagined a little girl reaching for her, smiling, laughing even, before the walls of the hospital swallowed her world. I shook the thought away. I told myself it was just a building, just decay, just shadows. But even as I said it, I could feel the air shift, a small tug at the back of my neck, like the room itself was aware of me. I moved slowly down the aisle of beds, my flashlight beam cutting a thin path through the gloom. Every mattress had a small pillow, flattened, faded, some with names stitched into the fabric. Tiny hands had clutched these things. Tiny lives had rested their heads here. I tried to ignore the sudden weight in my chest, the way my throat felt tight, and kept moving. The floorboards groaned under each step. I imagined someone else moving with me just out of sight, and I almost turned around to check. But I didn't. I told myself the sound were mine, my nerves. The hallway beyond was silent, save for the drip of water somewhere far off, maybe leaking from a ceiling. I paused at a small bed near the window. The blinds were broken, letting strips of pale gray light fall across the floor. I could see the outline of the bed clearly now, the pillow indented, as if someone had lain there not long ago. I knelt beside it and ran a finger along the sheet. Dust coated my hands immediately, but there was something else, a faint indentation in the fabric that didn't seem entirely natural. I frowned and leaned closer. It was too deliberate to be from decades of decay, too shaped, too perfect. My pulse quickened. I told myself I was imagining things. I leaned back and scanned the room. The other beds were in similar condition, scattered toys, tiny sheets pulled into unnatural folds, each with a story I couldn't know. I could almost hear the laughter, the small footsteps of children playing just beyond my reach. My stomach knotted, and I swallowed hard, forcing my mind to stay rational. I stepped toward the far side of the ward. My flashlight caught something on the floor, tiny footprints in the dust. They were small, bare, and led from one bed to another, then stopped abruptly. I froze. The prints didn't seem old enough to have been left by years of dust collecting. I bent down, trying to see if they were carved, scraped, or just an illusion, and then I heard it, a soft giggle. It wasn't loud, not even a full laugh, just the faintest sound, almost carried on the air itself. I jerked upright, heart thudding. I told myself it was the wind, a trick of the acoustics in the abandoned building. But the giggle came again, closer this time, from the far corner of the room where the shadows pooled thickest. I swallowed, trying to calm myself. It's just a building, I whispered. Just the shadows, just your nerves. The giggle answered me, soft, deliberate, almost teasing. I shined my flashlight toward the corner. The light fell on another tiny bed, sheets pulled into a perfect curl, a small stuffed bear lying face down. I held my breath. Nothing moved, nothing breathed. The room was still, and then I saw it, a shadow, a fleeting shape along the far wall, too quick to catch fully, but unmistakable. Small, child-sized, moving against the direction of the light, then gone in an instant. My knees weakened. I wanted to leave. I told myself I should leave, but something held me in place, an invisible weight pressing at my chest. I stepped closer to the far wall, flashlight trembling, eyes scanning every inch. Another toy shifted. A wooden train tipped slightly, rolling forward an inch before stopping. I jumped back. My breath came in short gasps. I tried to rationalize. Wind, vibration, rats, something mundane. Anything to explain away the feeling of being watched. But the air was heavy. The shadows thickened. I could feel it in my shoulders, the small tug at the back of my neck, the way the silence pressed into my ears. The children's ward wasn't empty. Not really. I took another step forward. My flashlight landed on a small crib near the window. The mattress sagged unnaturally, too much in the middle, as if someone or something had been sitting there, waiting. I could see faint scratches on the wood, small but deliberate, marks left by tiny hands, clawing at the edge. I swallowed hard. The giggle came again, closer this time, almost directly behind me. I spun around. Empty beds, toys frozen mid-scene. Shadows where shadows should have been. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. I took a cautious step forward. The air felt colder here, thinner, pressing at my lungs. I reached out, fingertips brushing a small blanket, folded at the edge of a bed. The fabric was damp, clammy, and smelled faintly of something sweet, like overripe fruit. I pulled it back. Underneath was a small diary, bound in faded leather, edges frayed. It looked almost new compared to everything else in the room. I hesitated, then picked it up. My hands shook. The pages were filled with tiny writing, neat and precise, documenting the days of the children who had stayed here. Names, ages, notes about their behavior. Small observations that should have been innocent but weren't. I flipped through quickly. Each page was the same, a careful record, precise, clinical, yet oddly intimate. And then one entry caught my eye. He watches when we sleep. He waits in the corners. We cannot see him, but he knows our names. A shiver ran down my spine. I looked around the ward. Shadows pooled in corners. The beds sagged as if someone just left them, and the toys seemed to lean slightly, just enough to feel alive. The giggle came again, soft, deliberate, almost knowing. I dropped the diary, heart hammering, and stumbled back. My flashlight beam swung wildly, catching the far wall. The shadows moved, stretching unnaturally, curling around the edges of the beds. And I realized with a sickening certainty that the children's ward hadn't been abandoned in the way I had believed. Something lingered here. Something patient. Watching. Waiting. I wanted to leave. I needed to leave. My footsteps echoed as I backed toward the door. I could feel the air tighten around me. Heavier, colder, like the room itself was breathing. Every creak of the floorboard sounded amplified, as if someone or something was moving just behind me. I reached the door. My hand trembled on the handle. I didn't look back, but I could feel it. Small eyes on the backs of my shoulders, tiny hands pressing lightly against my spine. Not enough to touch, just enough to remind me I wasn't alone. I opened the door and stumbled into the hallway. The ward behind me silent once more. The shadows retreated into corners. The beds were still. The toys lay where they had always been. The diary, the small record children's lives, lay forgotten on the floor. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I didn't want to see if the giggle lingered, if the shadows followed. I moved down the corridor, chest tight, breath short, heart hammering. And in the back of my mind, I knew that I had left nothing behind. Not really. They were still there, waiting, watching, remembering. The music started faintly, so faint I almost didn't hear it first. A single note, high-pitched crystalline, like a bell ringing far away. I froze, flashlight beam trembling in my hand. The children's ward lay behind me, silent now, but the sound had carried forward through the long, narrow hallway, curling into the corners like smoke. A lullaby. It was soft, deliberate, played slowly, carefully. I didn't recognize the tune. It didn't feel familiar. But the notes, they tugged at something deep inside me, an echo of memory I couldn't place. I swallowed hard, telling myself it was just an old music box left behind. Nothing more. I stepped forward. The lullaby grew louder, a few steps ahead, faintly mechanical in perfection, but warm, eerie, almost human. My heart rate quickened. Each note felt deliberate, like it was calling my name without words. I moved down the hall, flashlight sweeping over cracked walls and peeling paint. The floorboards groaned under each step, but the lullaby didn't pause. It shifted, always ahead of me, weaving through corners, bending around walls. I turned a corner, expecting to see a music box sitting on a table or a small hand cranking it slowly. Nothing. The hallway stretched on, longer than it should have, narrowing, bending, folding in ways that made my stomach twist. The lullaby floated toward me again, now layered, like multiple boxes playing the same tune, echoing off each other. The sound was sweet, sorrowful, and impossibly sad. It filled the space, but I couldn't find the source. I paused. The air was heavy here, scented faintly with dust and something else. Something sharp, metallic, and sweet, like old candy melted and left to rot. I shivered and whispered to myself, "It's just a music box, just an old toy." But then I realized it wasn't just a sound. There were whispers, soft and almost imperceptible, layered beneath the melody. Tiny voices, echoing, sighing, laughing faintly, so close I thought they were inside my head. Names were whispered between the notes. Names I had seen in the diary I'd found the night before. I felt my knees weaken. My flashlight beam shook as I followed the notes down another hallway, past rooms that I didn't remember passing before. Tiny shoes sat in neat rows by the walls, dusty and abandoned. Dolls leaned against the peeling wallpaper, faces tilted, blank eyes staring too directly at me. I stepped into a small playroom. A cracked window let in pale moonlight that spilled across the floor, illuminating broken blocks, a toppled chair, and a small rocking horse swaying slowly back and forth. But no one was there. Nothing was moving. And yet, the lullaby was louder here, a continuous, precise sequence of notes, moving from one corner of the room to another. I followed it instinctively. My flashlight flickered, then steadied, and I saw it. An old music box sitting on a low shelf, polished with dull by years of dust. I stepped closer, heart hammering. The lid was closed, and the key was not turning, not winding, not anything. And yet, the lullaby continued. I leaned down, pressing my ear to the box. The sound was clearer here, delicate and mournful, but no mechanism moved. No hand played it. And then I noticed the shadows in the room. They shifted in impossible ways. Shapes moved along the walls and ceiling, twisting and elongating, always just out of reach of the light. I could feel them, small presences pressing against the edges of my vision, lingering, waiting. The lullaby's notes threaded through the room like a spine, connecting each shadow, each object, each empty bed in a pattern I couldn't decipher. I stumbled backward, my flashlight beam sweeping across the room. Tiny hands pressed against the edges of the shelves, or maybe the shadows formed them, a fleeting glimpse, gone when I tried to focus. A chair tipped slowly as if someone invisible had leaned against it. The rocking horse creaked and groaned, moving slightly, even though no breeze disturbed the air. The lullaby shifted again. Now it was closer, behind me. My pulse raced. I turned. The hallway behind me was empty. No music box, no child, nothing. Yet the notes were louder, more insistent, almost impatient, as if the song itself were urging me forward, deeper into the building. I moved, hesitant, breath shallow. The floorboards groaned beneath me. Each step brought the melody closer, closer, wrapping around me, curling into my chest, tightening, pressing. And then I heard it, not the mechanical notes, not the whispering names, but faint humming in human voice, faint but unmistakable beneath the melody. A child. I stopped, trying to see. My flashlight beam scanned the room, landing on a small bed, sheets crumpled, indented as if someone had been lying there, maybe just moments ago. My stomach twisted. I told myself it was an illusion, a trick of shadows and light. But the humming continued, low, sorrowful, threading into the lullaby. I edged toward the bed. My hands shook as I reached for the sheets. The notes stuttered, changed slightly, almost as if responding to me. I froze. My fingers brushed the fabric. The sheets were cold, too cold. And then, for a heartbeat, I felt the weight of a tiny body pressing into them. I jerked back. The lullaby stopped abruptly, leaving silence so thick it pressed into my ears. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding. I swallowed hard, shaking my head, trying to steady my breathing. The shadows in the corners of the room had thickened, pressing closer. I felt the air vibrate with the presence of someone, something, watching, waiting. I turned toward the door. The hallway stretched impossibly long before me. The notes started again, faintly, slowly, curling through the air like smoke. I moved forward, drawn to the sound despite every instinct screaming at me to run. As I walked, the hallway seemed to shift. Walls that had been cracked and green were now pale blue, then yellow, then gray. The floor sagged underfoot, then leveled again. The lullaby remained, a constant thread to the changing landscape, a ribbon guiding me, taunting me, binding me to the building. The whispers returned, overlapping with the song. Names again, dozens of them, some I recognized from the diary, others unknown. They wove in and out of the melody, soft, patient, insistent. I stopped at another small doorway. Beyond it was another room. Tiny beds, toys scattered, shadows thickening. The lullaby played from within, and yet there was no music box to be found. I stepped inside. The shadows moved, not violently, not quickly, slowly, deliberately, curling around the beds and toys, pressing toward me without touching. The lullaby's notes wrapped around the shapes, forming a pattern I could almost understand, but not fully. My head ached with the strain of trying. And then, faintly, I felt it, a small hand on my shoulder. Cold, impossible, human. I spun. Nothing, just the shadows, just the empty room. The lullaby grew louder, faster, the notes intertwined with the whispers, forming a chorus of sorrow and longing. I backed toward the doorway, flashlight beam cutting a path through thick air. My chest tightened. I could feel the building pressing in, shaping itself around the song, the shadows, the voices. I stumbled back into the hallway. The lullaby followed, winding around corners, bouncing off walls, always just ahead of me. No source, no origin, just a sound that existed, impossibly, all around me, calling me further in. I ran. Each step seemed to stretch the hall, lengthen it. Shadows skittered along the walls, following but never reaching. The music box played, notes delicate, sorrowful, twisting into something alive, something aware of me. I rounded another corner. The hallway opened into a small atrium. Moonlight spilled through broken windows, illuminating the dust that danced in the air. And there in the center, no music box, no child, nothing at all. Just a lullaby, floating, surrounding me, echoing from the floor, the walls, the ceiling. I sank to my knees. My flashlight beam flickered, weak in the pale light. The lullaby played softly, insistently, and I realized I couldn't locate it. I couldn't stop it. I couldn't understand it. It was everywhere and nowhere, haunting the space, lingering in my chest, threading into my thoughts, refusing to let me leave untouched. And then I understood. It wasn't calling me to it. It wasn't leading me anywhere. It was letting me know I was never truly alone here. That the children, the shadows, the presence that lingered in this ward, they were patient. They were everywhere. And the lullaby was theirs. I had been following the lullaby for what felt like hours, though I had no idea if it was minutes or days. The hallway stretched before me, walls peeling, the air thick with dust and decay, carrying the faint scent of old crayons and wax. And then I saw them, the drawings. At first, they looked like childish scribbles, bright colors, rough lines, simple shapes, stick figures with huge, round eyes, smiling faces, houses with crooked chimneys. But the closer I got, the more deliberate they seemed. The figures weren't just drawn, they were pressed into the wall, as if the plaster itself had taken the shape of tiny hands. The lines were too precise to be random. I stepped closer, heart hammering. A small figure of a child, drawn in orange crayon, waved as I approached. Its eyes were wide, happy, or at least they had been. I blinked. The eyes shifted slightly, tilting toward me. My throat tightened. I swallowed hard, telling myself I was imagining things. I looked away, toward the floor. My flashlight beam caught a line of footprints in the dust, small, bare, pressed into the floor. I looked back up. The drawing had changed. The smile was gone. The eyes were dark holes, hollow and empty. The figure leaned slightly forward, tilting as if peering at me from across the wall. I stumbled back, my breath catching. My flashlight flickered. I took a deep breath. It's just paint. Just drawings, I whispered to myself. But the walls, they weren't still. They never were. I glanced to my left. A cluster of figures, 5 or 6 stick children, shifted as I moved my eyes. When I looked directly, they were normal again, innocent, almost cheerful. But when I looked away, they whispered, softly, impossibly small, names floating through the air. Anna, Thomas, Lily. The names were faint at first, almost drowned out by my own heartbeat, but I recognized some of them. The diary from the ward, the tiny beds, the list of children who had stayed here. My hand shook. I ran a shaky finger along the wall, smudging a line of red crayon. The lines pulsed beneath my touch, and I jerked back. Stop, I whispered. The words sounded small, fragile, and lost in the stillness. The drawings shifted again. More figures appeared, some standing, some kneeling, all facing me. Their eyes, oh God, their eyes, they were hollow, dark, infinite. They weren't innocent anymore. They weren't playful. They were waiting, watching, judging. I wanted to leave. My legs wanted to move, but my feet were rooted to the floor. A cold wave pressed down on my shoulders, like a weight that wasn't there yesterday, but had always been waiting for me. I felt them, not just the drawings, not just the shapes on the walls, but the presence behind them. Something patient, something alive. And then I heard it, a whisper, this time closer, just above my shoulder. Liam. I spun around. Empty hallway. Only the walls, the dust, the faint flicker of my flashlight. My breath came fast, shallow. The names continued, soft as sighs, threading between the cracks in plaster. Emily, Michael, Sarah, Liam. I ran my hands through my hair, shaking my head, telling myself it was just my mind, just fear, just exhaustion. But the names didn't stop. They flowed around me, through me, pressing into my chest. I moved down the hallway, careful now, trying not to stare directly at any figure. The drawings shifted as I passed, glancing sideways at me, whispering, tilting, stretching. Each new corner brought fresh faces, all staring, all moving when I dared look away. Some were smiling again, then frowning, then blank, unreadable. A door caught my attention. I didn't want to go inside, but something drew me closer. Curiosity mingled with dread. The frame was splintered, paint chipped. Inside, a small classroom. Tiny desks, toppled chairs, crayons scattered across the floor. The walls were covered in paintings. Faces, dozens of them, all staring. I stepped inside. The air was heavy here, warmer than the hall, stale with old chalk and wax. My flashlight beam swung over the faces. Each child had a different expression. Some happy, some sad, some angry. All of them moved slightly when I wasn't looking. I knelt to examine one. A small girl in pink, her eyes wide, staring at the door. I looked away for a moment, to a desk. When I glanced back, her mouth was open, forming a silent scream. I stumbled back, heart hammering. The other faces shifted too, turning toward me, tilting their heads. The whispers grew louder, now a chorus, layering over each other, indistinct yet urgent. Liam, Liam, Liam. I covered my ears, my body shaking. The chorus continued, layered over the faint melody of the music box from before. It wasn't loud, not deafening, but it pressed into me, into my mind, like the building itself was speaking through them. I tried to move toward the door. My legs felt heavy, weighted. The walls themselves seemed to close in, the drawings stretching, faces pressing forward, not enough to touch, but enough to make me feel trapped, suffocated. One figure moved differently. A boy in blue, standing at the corner of the room. He stepped closer when I looked away, then froze. I dared to glance back. He was closer still, almost at the edge of my light. I felt his gaze. Small, infinite, full of something patient, sad, and angry all at once. I stumbled backward, tripping over a chair. My flashlight clattered to the floor, flickering across the walls. The shadows of the drawings danced, stretched, pulsing with each blink of light. I reached the flashlight, shaking, and when I picked it up, the boy in blue had vanished. A whisper came from the corner, low and deliberate. "Stay." I spun. Empty room. Tiny desks. Scattered crayons. The air trembled with something unseen. I swallowed hard. The whispers continued, soft, insistent, naming every child I had read about, every bed I had passed, every toy I had seen in the ward. I knew I wasn't alone. I could feel them all around me, patient, waiting, watching, their eyes, drawn on the walls, pressed into me, burning into my thoughts. The chorus of whispers and faint lullabies wrapped around the room, thick, tangible, like smoke, suffocating yet gentle, sorrowful yet demanding. I backed toward the door. The walls seemed to elongate, stretch, the faces shifting with me, tilting, whispering, moving in impossible ways. I almost reached the frame when a small hand pressed against my shoulder. Cold, empty. I spun nothing, just the drawings, alive in their impossible ways. I didn't stay to look. I bolted through the doorway, down the hallway, the whispers trailing me, names, hundreds of them, soft, patient, insistent. The lullaby threaded through the air, wrapping around the chorus of voices, binding me to the ward. The hallway stretched longer than it should, twisting, bending, corners I hadn't passed before opening suddenly in front of me. Faces pressed along the walls, moving just beyond the edges of my vision, shifting with impossible fluidity. Each step I took, each breath, each heartbeat, echoed back at me through them. I tried to tell myself it was exhaustion, imagination, but I knew better. The faces were real. The whispers were real. The presence, the children, whoever or whatever they had become, were real, and they remembered. I reached the main corridor. The tiny beds, the toys, the ward I had explored before, all lay in silence, unchanged, as if I hadn't been there at all. But I had. I had seen it all. I had felt them. I had heard their names. I leaned against a wall, trembling, flashlight flickering, and whispered to myself, I can leave. I can leave. The voices didn't answer, but the faces watched. And I knew, deep in my chest, in that cold, hollow place where fear and memory intertwined, that leaving wouldn't be so simple. Not tonight. Not in this ward. The morgue smelled before I even stepped inside. Cold metal, damp concrete, and something else. Something faint, coppery, sweet, almost cloying. I paused at the threshold, gripping my flashlight, its beam trembling slightly in the darkness. And I knew, deep in my chest, in that cold, hollow place where fear and memory intertwined, that leaving wouldn't be so simple. Not tonight. Not in this ward. The morgue smelled before I even stepped inside. Cold metal, damp concrete, and something else. Something faint, coppery, sweet, almost cloying. I paused at the threshold, gripping my flashlight, its beam trembling slightly in the darkness. The door behind me had grown on its hinges as I entered, leaving me alone in the chill. Alone or almost alone. Rows of steel drawers stretched before me. Hundreds of them, stacked neatly against the walls, their cold surfaces reflecting the thin light in dull, gray streaks. Some drawers were sealed tight, polished metal clean and sterile. Others were slightly open, like fingers left loose, inviting or daring me to look closer. I walked slowly between them. My footsteps echoed, hollow, bouncing off the walls. I could hear the faint drip of water somewhere far away, maybe from a leaky pipe, maybe not. My flashlight caught a drawer slightly ajar. I paused. The metal was cold and heavy looking. The gap was small, maybe an inch, but it was enough. I leaned closer, shining the light into the gap. The air that escaped was colder than the rest of the room, biting at my face. I saw it. Pale skin, mottled, bloated slightly from decay, a thin sheen of moisture on it. I staggered back, swallowing, trying to steady myself. My stomach twisted. I told myself to breathe. Just a body. Just the remains of someone who had died long ago. But the skin, it looked almost fresh. Too fresh. Too recent for the age of the building. The dust in the corners, the rust on the pipes. My fingers itched, my mind racing. I shouldn't look, but I couldn't stop myself. Another drawer creaked as I passed. The sound was soft but deliberate, like it had been pushed open by someone or something. I froze, scanning the room. Rows of metal stretched on, unbroken, silent, except for the occasional drip and the whisper of my own breath. I bent down to peer into the second slightly open drawer. My flashlight beam trembled. The skin was mottled, but there were signs of something unnatural. Tiny scratches, shallow cuts, not enough to hurt, but enough to mark. The fingers were curled, small, tense. I imagined them twitching under the metal, trying to escape. My chest tightened. I stepped back, shoving the beam of light across the rest of the drawers. They were all the same, silent, except for those few ajar. Some showed pale, lifeless hands, knuckles white under the thin skin. Some revealed faces, barely visible under shadows. Eyes closed or open, I wasn't sure, and a faint sheen of moisture that caught the light and reflected it like glass. The room pressed in on me. The cold metal, the smell of decay, the faint, almost imperceptible sound of shifting within the drawers. I told myself it was nothing, just old bodies, just a morgue, just my imagination. But then I heard it, a soft groan, almost like a sigh. It came from the far end of the room, where the last row of drawers met the wall. I froze, heart hammering. The groan came again low, almost deliberate, rising and falling like someone exhaling slowly. My mind tried to rationalize it. Pipes, rusted hinges, air moving through the building. Anything but whatever else it could be. I stepped closer. My flashlight trembled in my hand, and I could feel the sweat running down my spine despite the cold. The last drawer was slightly open. The groan came again. I leaned closer, unwilling but unable to stop myself. Inside, a hand pressed lightly against the edge of the drawer, pale, thin, fingers curling slightly, almost beckoning. My stomach knotted. I stumbled back, hitting a nearby drawer with a clang. The sound echoed sharply, and the hand disappeared. The drawer slammed shut with a deafening clang that made my ears ring. I stumbled backward, heart racing, chest tight. My flashlight flickered across the room. The other slightly open drawers, they were moving. Not violently, not quickly, just shifting slowly, sliding a fraction, opening wider as if something inside was testing the metal, pressing against it, waiting for the right moment. I wanted to leave. I needed to leave. But my feet were heavy, stuck to the cold concrete floor, as if the room itself had some invisible hold on me. My breathing came in short, shallow bursts. Every fiber of my body screamed at me to turn around and run, but I couldn't move fast enough. I stepped closer to the nearest drawer, the one I had first looked into. My hand shook as I reached for the handle. The groan came again, louder, closer, almost beside me. I froze, every nerve screaming. The metal under my fingers was icy cold. I pushed it open slowly. The body inside wasn't alone. A faint movement, just the corner of an eye, a shallow blink. My mind reeled. The skin, mottled and pale, shifted slightly, as if trying to adjust my gaze. I couldn't look away. And then I realized the eyes were open, watching me, unblinking, patient. I staggered back, choking on my own breath. The groaning intensified, coming from multiple drawers now, not in unison but overlapping like a chorus. The metal of the drawers shivered slightly, small vibrations that pressed into my hands when I gripped the nearest one. I stumbled backward, almost tripping over a fallen flashlight. My beam caught a small notebook lying on the floor, leather-bound, edges frayed. I picked it up with trembling fingers. The pages were filled with neat writing, notes, observations, names, dates. Patients who had never left, bodies that were never claimed. Notes about temperature, decomposition, abnormal resistance to decay, something about preserving consciousness. My stomach twisted violently. I wanted to throw the notebook, to run, to escape, but curiosity, or perhaps horror, kept me rooted. I read a line aloud, barely above a whisper. Even when sealed they feel, they remember, they wait. I dropped the notebook. The drawers shifted again. A faint metallic scrape, like nails against steel, came from the row to my left. I spun my flashlight. The drawer nearest me was opening on its own. Slowly, deliberately, I stepped back. My hand brushed another drawer, slightly ajar, and a faint hiss escaped it, like breath, warm and wet in the cold air. The smell intensified. Coppery, sharp, almost sweet. My chest tightened. I could feel my pulse thunder in my ears. I wanted to run. My mind screamed. But my body moved slowly, dragging my feet as if the concrete were thickened with ice. The drawers opened wider, revealing glimpses of faces, hands, torsos, shapes shifting under the dim light. Hints of life where there should have been none. A whisper came from one of the far drawers. Not a name, just a single word. Stay. I staggered back, tripping over a fallen chair. The groaning intensified, overlapping whispers now rising from every drawer. The metal drawers themselves seemed alive, trembling, sliding slightly on their tracks. Shapes pressed against the metal from inside. Faint impressions of bodies moving against the steel, pressing, waiting. I scrambled toward the door. My flashlight flickered violently, then steadied. The drawer stopped moving. Silence pressed down suddenly, heavy and thick. The metal was cold beneath my hands. Still, unmoving. My chest heaved. My pulse raced. I forced myself to look back, scanning the room. Everything seemed normal again. Rows of cold steel, some slightly open, some closed, nothing moving. The coppery smell lingered faintly, but the groaning and hissing were gone. I exhaled shakily, shoving the door open. Cold night air hit me, carrying rain and wind, the faintest hint of smoke from the abandoned hospital outside. I stumbled into the corridor, chest tight, knees weak. I could still feel the pressure of the drawers, the presence of whatever had been inside, pressing at the edges of my mind. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The morgue waited silently behind me. Steel drawers closed, bodies hidden, patient, watching. And I knew one thing with certainty. It remembered me. I didn't sleep after morgue. I lay on a narrow cot in the staff room, staring at the ceiling tiles, counting the cracks like they were hours. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw steel drawers sliding open, pale hands, watching eyes, waiting. By the time morning came, the fear had settled into something heavier. Not panic, not shock, something colder, like dread that had found a place to sit and decided to stay. I told myself I still had a job to do. That's how I ended up back there. The freezer was at the far end of the lower level, past the autopsy rooms and the supply cages. It was always cold down there, but that day felt different. The air had weight to it. It pressed against my skin, against my lungs, like I was breathing through ice water. The hum started before I even reached the door. A low, steady sound. Mechanical, familiar, but wrong somehow. Too deep, too slow, like it wasn't just a machine running, but something alive pretending to be one. I stopped outside the freezer door and rested my hand against the metal. It burned with cold. My palm stuck for half a second before I pulled away. I remember thinking, this is where it ends if you're not careful. That thought didn't feel like mine. I pushed the door open. The cold hit me instantly. Not a sharp chill, but a swallowing one. It wrapped around my head and shoulders, crawled down my spine, settled into my bones. My breath fogged thick in front of my face. Rows of shelves lined the freezer, each holding bodies wrapped in white sheets or sealed in bags. The fluorescent light above flickered faintly, buzzing like an insect trapped in glass. The hum grew louder once the door shut behind me. I stepped inside and the sound seemed to shift, lowering in pitch, vibrating through the soles of my boots. My fingers went numb almost immediately. I flexed them, trying to keep feeling. The smell was clean. Too clean. Sterile. With a faint undertone I couldn't place. Not decay. Not chemicals. Something flat and empty, like air that had forgotten what warmth was. I walked between the shelves, counting rows, pretending this was routine. Inventory. Maintenance. Anything but what it really felt like. Then I felt the breath. It brushed the back of my neck, soft and damp, like someone leaning close to whisper. My shoulders locked up. I didn't turn right away. I couldn't. The air behind me was empty. I knew it was. I could hear the hum, the buzz of the lights, my own breathing. No footsteps, no movement. Still, the breath came again, slower this time, colder. It traced the side of my neck, down toward my collarbone, like invisible lips hovering just above my skin. Goosebumps rippled across my arms. No! I whispered, the word cracking in the frozen air. I spun around, flashlight swinging wildly. Nothing, just shelves, white shapes, stillness. I stood there shaking, teeth chattering now, not just from the cold. My mind raced, grasping for explanations. Air circulation, temperature shift, nerves. But deep down I knew better. I took a step back and bumped into a shelf. The contact sent a jolt through my body. A low metallic rattle echoed through the freezer. The hum stuttered for half a second, then resumed, louder than before. That's when I felt the fingers. They were light, almost careful. Two of them brushed the base of my neck, right where my pulse beat hardest. Not gripping, not scratching, just there, resting, testing. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't scream. My voice felt frozen solid. I stood perfectly still, afraid that if I moved, the touch would become something worse. The fingers slid upward, just enough to graze the edge of my hairline. Cold, not like metal, not like ice, like something that had never been warm. I whispered again, please, though I didn't know who I was begging. The fingers vanished. The air snapped back into place like nothing had ever touched me. I staggered forward, nearly slipping on the frost-dusted floor. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I pressed a shaking hand to my neck. My skin burned where the fingers had been, like frostbite starting to thaw. I forced myself to keep moving. I checked tags, names, dates. I don't remember any of them now. They blurred together, meaningless. All I could focus on was the space behind me, The feeling of being watched. Every few steps, I felt again, a brush of cold breath near my ear, a soft pressure between my shoulders. Once, something traced a curve of my jaw. I never saw anything. That was the worst part. If I'd seen a shape, a shadow, a face, I could have named it, fought it, run from it. But there was nothing, just absence. At the far end of the freezer, I noticed one shelf that looked wrong. The frost pattern was uneven, thicker around a single body bag. The plastic beneath was stretched tight, like something inside was pushing outward. I didn't want to look. I knew that feeling now, that warning deep in my chest, the one I ignored every time. I stepped closer. The tag on the bag was old, faded ink, a child's name. I won't say it here. My breath fog thick as I leaned in. The hum dropped again, sinking into a deep, almost comforting vibration. Then the bag shifted. Not much, just a small movement, like a chest rising with breath. I stumbled back, knocking into another shelf. The fingers returned instantly, firmer now. One pressed against the hollow of my throat. Another slid across my shoulder. The cold was unbearable. I felt my vision narrowing, dark creeping in at the edges. My ears rang. The hum swallowed every other sound. And then, right against my ear, something breathed in, not out, in, like it was taking my warmth. I gasped, breaking free, tearing myself away from touch. I ran, slipped, caught myself on a shelf, ripping my glove open on exposed metal. I didn't care. I bolted for the door, lungs burning, legs heavy like they were moving through water. Behind me, the hum rose into something almost like laughter, low, mechanical, endless. I slammed into the freezer door and shoved it open. Warm air hit my face like fire. I collapsed into the hallway, gasping, clawing at my throat like I was drowning. The door swung shut on its own. The hum muffled, but it didn't stop. I lay there for a long time, long enough for the floor to soak through my clothes, long enough for my hands to stop shaking. When I finally stood, my neck ached. I reached up and felt faint marks. Not scratches, not bruises, just cold. Even hours later, long after I left the building, I could still feel it. That breath, waiting just behind me. And I understood something then with terrifying clarity. The morgue wasn't holding the dead. It was keeping them warm. And something else was learning how to breathe. I told myself it was just the freezer. Just cold air, nerves, imagination. But as I moved further into the lower wing, toward the old autopsy room, I knew it wasn't. Not anymore. Not after the hum, the breath, the invisible fingers. Whatever was in this place, it had learned I existed. The corridor was narrow, walls lined with peeling paint and rusted pipes. Water dripped somewhere above, small droplets echoing like distant gunfire. My flashlight cast long, flickering shadows across the floor. I gripped it tighter. Every instinct screamed to turn back, to leave, but something kept pulling me forward. The door to the autopsy room was heavy, steel, and hung crooked on rusted hinges. I hesitated before pushing it open. The smell hit me first. Sharp antiseptic mixed with decay and something metallic. Not blood exactly, but the ghost of it. My stomach twisted. I swallowed hard, forcing myself inside. The room was frozen in time. Tables lined up in neat rows, instruments carefully placed as if someone had set them down for a patient who never came. The tile floor was cracked, stained with brown and red, forming patterns that almost looked deliberate, like someone had traced shapes with spilled liquid. And in the center, a mannequin. It wasn't one of those simple hospital dummies. This was detailed, anatomically correct, and unervingly lifelike. Limbs slightly bent, head tilted, eyes open, staring. The plastic skin had been scored and painted in places to mimic dissection. But as I stepped closer, I realized it was more than painted. It pulsed. I froze mid-step. My flashlight trembled in my hand. The pulse was subtle at first, a tiny swelling in the chest cavity, a faint twitch in the fingers. I blinked. The pulse stopped. I moved forward again. It started once more, just beneath the skin of the torso, slow, deliberate, almost breathing. I shook my head. It's a mannequin. Plastic. Paint. Nothing alive here. But the room, it was too quiet. Too still. The air pressed down on me, heavy and slow. I could hear my heartbeat, loud in my ears, drowning out every other sound. I noticed a note scattered across a side table. Yellow with age, edges frayed. Someone had left them in haste. Or perhaps they hadn't been touched for decades. I picked one up carefully, my hands trembling. The handwriting was precise, neat, clinical. Observations, measurements, notes on incision patterns, the response of muscles and tendons, and then the experiments. Sensory perception seems retained longer than anticipated. Pain response minimal, but awareness present. The subject registers presence outside the table. I felt the pulse of the mannequin again. My chest tightened, my breathing hitched. I swallowed hard. The paper trembled slightly in my grip. Another note. Further testing required. Conscious retention must be extended. Ethical limits are flexible. The body must remain responsive, never still. I dropped the notebook. It hit the floor with a soft thud, echoing oddly in the sterile space. The mannequin shifted again, fingers curling slightly, the chest rising as if inhaling a slow breath. I stumbled back, mind racing. It's a trick of light. Shadows, the air moving the plastic. That's all it is. But I knew it wasn't. The room was holding its breath. Every tile, every table, every instrument seemed to vibrate subtly under my skin. I could feel eyes on me. Not the mannequins. Something else. Something patient. Something that had waited decades for someone foolish enough to enter. I tried to focus on the instruments. Scalpels, forceps, saws, all meticulously placed, clean despite the years. But the air around them shimmered, the shadows twisting slightly. The pulse under the mannequin skin synchronized with the flicker of my flashlight. Inhale, exhale, inhale. I backed toward the door, my legs unsteady. But the room had other ideas. The door seemed farther than it should, the tiles stretching slightly, shadows twisting, elongating, forming shapes that weren't there a moment ago. The mannequin's head tilted toward me, eyes wide, plastic pupils impossibly dark. I could swear I saw a subtle movement in the mouth, a twitch, like a whisper just below the threshold of sound. A paper slid off the side table. I didn't touch it. It wasn't wind. The air was still. The note landed near my foot. I glanced down. Another line. Do not leave before the body responds. Presence must be acknowledged. Subjects are listening. My stomach knotted. My flashlight flickered. A low hum rose from somewhere deep in the room. Not mechanical. Organic. It vibrated in my chest. The mannequin's pulse quickened. Faster, sharper, more deliberate. I stumbled, tripping over a chair. My hand hit the table. Instruments rattled. The hum intensified. I turned to run and froze. Across the room, a second mannequin had appeared. I had not seen it before, or perhaps it hadn't been there. Its chest moved in time with the first. Limbs bent in impossible ways. The faces hollow but aware, watching me, learning me. I realized with sudden, sickening clarity that these were not mannequins, not entirely. Something about them pulsed with what had been stolen from the bodies in the freezer, a remnant of awareness, of consciousness, trapped in shapes that should have been lifeless. I took a shaky step back. The floor beneath my boots felt colder, denser. It was pressing upward slightly, like the building itself was breathing. I swallowed, voice barely audible. This isn't real. A whisper answered me, not through the air, through my head. It is... I stumbled again, flashlight beam swinging wildly, catching reflections in the stainless steel trays. Shadows stretched and twisted. The instruments gleamed, seemingly in motion, moving just out corner of my eye. The hum became a chorus, a low, distorted vibration, as if the room itself were trying to speak. I wanted to scream. My voice failed. My body froze. The mannequin pulsed faster now, its chest rising and falling, hands twitching. Its head turned slowly, deliberately, in time with the second one. They were synchronized, learning, waiting. The notes on the floor began to shift, not by wind, not by gravity. Each word seemed to crawl slightly, rearranging itself. Acknowledged presence, never still, respond. I realized the room was a trap, not of steel or locks, of time and perception. Every object, every surface, every shadow existed to hold attention, to prolong observation, to feed on my fear and curiosity. I had to leave. I forced myself to step toward the door. Each movement took effort. The air thickened, pressing against me, making my limbs heavy. The hum wrapped around my chest, constricting, pulsing in time with the mannequin's chest. And then the whispers began. Names. Hundreds. Not children this time, not patients. Names I had never heard, yet remembered. Echoes of lives recorded here, preserved against death. All watching me, waiting for me to acknowledge them. I forced the door open. The cold air of the corridor hit me like a punch. The hum faded instantly. The mannequins frozen once more in plastic stillness. The notes lay inert, unreadable. I collapsed against the wall, hands trembling, pulse wild. My mind reeled. The building had shown me something impossible, something cruel. The corpses, the mannequins, the notes. They weren't just records. They were experiments in presence, in awareness beyond death. And I had walked into it willingly. I stared down the corridor. Everything appeared normal again. The freezer, the hallways, the drip of water. Yet I could feel it lingering, cold, patient, watching. I pressed my palms to my eyes. I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't unfeel it. The pulse of the mannequin, the whispers of names, the notes crawling across the floor. I could still hear it, faintly, even in my memory, echoing in the silence behind my eyelids. I realized something else too, something worse. Whoever had conducted these experiments, whoever had preserved awareness in lifeless shapes, had not left, not entirely, not completely. The building itself remembered me, and I would carry it with me forever. I had no idea how long I had been in the morgue when the realization hit me. I wasn't moving forward. Time had slowed or stopped entirely. Every second stretched into something heavier, thicker, like the air itself had grown dense and sticky. I had backed myself into a corner, leaning against a wall of cold concrete, staring at the steel drawers. My flashlight had burned down to a weak, flickering beam, barely illuminating the rows in front of me. The hum from earlier was gone, replaced by silence that was almost too quiet. My ears strained. My heart beat, steady but loud, or so I thought. Then I realized it wasn't just my heartbeat. It was echoing from the drawers. Slow, deep metallic. Thump, thump, thump. Like the metal itself was mimicking the rhythm of my pulse. I froze, counting, hoping to convince myself it was my imagination. But no. Every beat of my heart was mirrored by a vibrating thrum to the floor and the steel beneath my fingertips. I tried to move. My legs wouldn't respond. Not because they were weak. Not because I was frozen with fear. But because the room itself seemed to hold me in place. I took a hesitant step, and the vibration shifted, like the drawers were aware of my motion. Adjusting to my weight and my rhythm, the air grew colder. My breath fogged instantly, hanging thick and ghost-like in front of me. I exhaled slowly, willing my body to obey me, and that's when I noticed the shadows. At first, I thought it was a flickering light. Flickers cast long shapes, bending and stretching across the floor. But the shadows moved independently. One stretched along the ceiling, then fell, crawling down a row of drawers like liquid. Another curved around the base of a table, coiling like a living thing. They didn't just move with the light. They moved with intent. They followed me. Even when I turned, the shadows didn't disappear. They lingered, twisting, stretching, mocking my movements. I gripped my flashlight tighter, hands shaking. The beam trembled across the steel, catching faint glimpses of hands, of pale shapes pressed against the insides of the drawers. Just glimpses, enough to make my stomach twist. I blinked. They were gone, but the shadows remained. I realized then, with a jolt that made my chest tighten, that I could hear more than just a mirror heartbeat. Whispers, low, almost beneath my hearing. Names. My name. Variations of it. Half-formed words that seemed to scrape across my eardrums. Stay. I stumbled backward, almost tripping over a fallen stool. My flashlight beam fell across one of the drawers that had been closed. Now it was open just slightly, like a mouth beginning to yawn. My pulse hammered. The echoed heartbeat quickened in tandem. I don't know why I approached it. Maybe curiosity. Maybe desperation. Maybe I thought if I touched it, I could understand what was happening. My fingers brushed the cold metal handle. The drawer shivered under my touch. Slowly, impossibly slowly, it opened farther. Inside, nothing, or nothing recognizable. Just darkness. My light barely penetrated it, but I could see the faintest movement. The metal itself seemed to pulse. My heartbeat thudded harder. Then I saw my reflection. Not in a mirror, not in glass. The steel reflected me, distorted, twisted. My eyes were wrong. Too large, too dark. My mouth moved slightly before I did. A flicker, almost like the drawer itself was mimicking me, echoing me, mocking me. I stumbled backward, hands over my face, shaking. The shadows slithered closer, curling around my legs, rising along the tables like smoke. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, incoherent now, but insistent. Names, commands, warnings. Some of them I recognized from the patient files. Some I didn't. I tried to run, but my body betrayed me. Each step was heavier, slower, as if the air was thick with lead. The drawers themselves seemed to push against me. Subtle pressure from the sides, from beneath. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, echoed by the metal. Thump, thump, thump. I turned to see the shadows rise fully. They coalesced in the center of the room, forming vague humanoid shapes, taller than me, bending at angles that should have been impossible. My stomach lurched. They weren't solid, just dark, formless, yet undeniably aware. Watching, waiting. I fell back against the wall. The room itself seemed to tilt, a subtle sway I could feel in my spine. The shadows stretched along the ceiling, down the walls, reaching toward me, and every inch they covered made the air colder, heavier, tighter. I remember reaching for a drawer, any drawer, as if touching the metal could ground me, anchor me in reality. My fingers met the cold steel. It vibrated immediately, a slow pulse, and then faster, faster, racing to match my own accelerated heartbeat. The whispers intensified, not just my name now, but the names of patients. Children, adults, all preserved here, trapped in these drawers, their consciousness somehow lingering, somehow aware of me. Some names I knew from the files, others I didn't. Some of the names felt like they came from another time entirely. I stumbled again, and that's when I noticed the first movement in the shadows that wasn't mimicry. A shape stepped forward, no feet visible, just a dark outline pressing into the air. I froze. It didn't speak. It didn't move quickly, but the awareness, the presence, was undeniable. It acknowledged me, and then another followed, and another. I was trapped, not by walls, not by locks, but by awareness, by recognition, by the fact that the building itself, the drawers, the bodies, everything knew I existed, and they remembered. I sank to the floor, shivering. My flashlight lay beside me, beam trembling across the room. The shadows approached slowly, circling me, stretching taller, bending unnaturally. The whispers now formed sentences, fragments I couldn't fully grasp. Do not leave, stay, they watch, remember. I pressed my palms to my ears, trying to block them out. It didn't help. The voices weren't coming from the air. They were inside my head, mirrored by the steel, pulled from my own memory. I remember the freezer, the pulse of the mannequins, the invisible fingers brushing my neck. All of it had been a warning. The shadows condensed briefly, almost like they were laughing, a soundless, impossible motion that pressed into my chest. I realized the room was not just reflecting me. It was learning me, measuring me, testing me, seeing how much I could endure before what? Before I became part of it. I crawled backward, trying to distance myself from the shadows. Each inch was a struggle. The floor vibrated faintly under my palms. My heartbeat echoed again, louder than ever. Thump, thump, thump. One shadow detached from the others. It glided toward me. Not a humanoid form exactly, but something humanoid adjacent. It stopped inches from my face. The air around it was freezing. My breath came out in clouds. I wanted to look away. I couldn't. It tilted its head, and I felt more than saw a presence inside it, examining me, reading me, waiting for my next move. I scrambled, got to my feet, legs weak, moving toward the door. Every drawer I passed seemed to vibrate, pulse, shift subtly. I didn't dare look back. The whispers escalated, a storm of sound I could barely comprehend, my own heartbeat entangled with theirs. The door loomed ahead. I lunged toward it, chest heaving. My hand slammed into the cold steel handle. It was heavier than before, almost resisting. I pulled. The shadows surged forward, pressing close. The vibration of the drawers became almost unbearable, syncing perfectly with the rapid thundering of my pulse. Finally, the door gave way. I stumbled through, lungs burning, collapsing into the corridor. The ambient chill of the morgue hung around me, but the shadows and whispers stayed behind. I sank to the floor, shaking. My pulse slowly returned to something close to normal, though I could still feel faint echoes in my chest, like the drawers were imprinted into my body. The hallway seemed normal, empty, silent, but I knew better. I knew the morgue was still alive, watching, remembering, waiting, and somewhere in that frozen, steel-filled room, time itself had learned my name. I couldn't stop thinking about the pulse, the shadows, the whispers. I couldn't stop thinking about the bodies and the experiments, the awareness that had been cultivated, preserved. I felt like I had glimpsed the wrong side of the universe, and the image had burned itself into my mind. And I knew, deep in the marrow of my bones, that once you saw it, once you experienced it, it never let go. The rain had started before I even reached the stairwell. Hard, relentless sheets, drumming against the roof above like the world itself was angry. I didn't care. I needed to see the hospital from above, to get a sense of the building, its history, its silence. The stairs were slick, the metal grating groaning under each step. My flashlight flickered weakly, casting thin beams that trembled along the concrete walls. Water ran in rivulets down the stairwell, puddling at the corners, soaking my boots. I kept moving, one step after another, counting silently, grounding myself. Don't slip, don't look back. The higher I climbed, the more the sound of rain grew, until it was deafening. It drowned out everything else, or so I thought. The roof hatch was cold metal under my palms when I pushed it open. The first gust of wind, and rain hit me like a wall. Water soaked my jacket instantly, plastered my hair to my forehead. I pulled the hood tight, shivering. The city lights in the distance glimmered dimly through the storm, but here, atop this abandoned building, the world felt erased. Only the rain, the wind, and the hospital. I stepped carefully onto the roof. Tiles slick beneath my feet, punctuated by rusted vents and air conditioning units that had long since stopped working. I paused near the edge, looking down at the hospital's maze of hallways, the broken windows, the dark, empty rooms. Shadows clung to corners, but I could see them in the flickering light of my flashlight. Peeling paint, long-forgotten graffiti, the stain of time itself. And then I heard it. Footsteps. At first, I thought it was a storm, my own boots against the roof. But no, this was something different. Slow, deliberate, echoing across the tiles in a rhythm that matched nothing I was doing. I froze. My flashlight beam swung nervously, catching nothing. Empty roof. Just me. Just rain. Just the endless gray sky. Another step. Then another. I swallowed, throat dry. My pulse spiked. Who's up here? I called, voice barely carrying over the storm. Hello? Silence. Only the footsteps. And I knew they weren't mine. I spun, flashlight cutting the rain into sharp slices of light. The roof stretched in every direction, empty. No shapes, no figure. Just my own shadow, tall and wet, flickering against the walls and vents. Yet the steps continued. Behind me now, closer. or maybe a head. I couldn't tell. Every time I turned, the sound shifted, always just out of sight. I wanted to run, wanted to dive down the stairwell and leave this place, but something rooted me. Curiosity, fear, stubbornness. I took a cautious step forward. The rain soaked through to my skin. Each droplet burned, sharp against my cheeks. Wind whipped against my ears, carrying whispers, or maybe just a storm. My hair whipped into my face. My gloves slippery against the flashlight handle. I could feel in my chest a strange, pulsing tension, the kind that tells you something is very wrong, but you can't see it yet. Then I saw a shadow, or what I thought was a shadow. It moved along the roof in a way that defied reason. Not just my own, not just a storm. A thin, black smear along the tiles, darting quickly, then vanishing behind a vent. My stomach turned. My mind raced. I told myself I was imagining it. Lightning cracked across the sky, bright and sharp, revealing nothing. Empty tiles, empty vents. Only my own wet reflection in a puddle. And yet, I could feel it. Watching, waiting. I climbed higher, toward the far edge of the roof, where a small access hatch led to the maintenance platform. The storm was relentless now, pouring in sheets that cut across my face and arms. Water ran into my boots. I pulled the hood tighter, tightened my grip on the flashlight. My heart pounded in time with the echoing steps I couldn't locate. I reached the platform and peered over the edge. The city stretched into gray blurs of light and rain, distant streets gleaming with reflections. But down here closer, the hospital lay silent, yet almost alive. I could feel the pulse of it beneath my feet, a vibration, subtle, like the building itself inhaled and exhaled, slow and deliberate. Another step. Behind me, I whipped around. Empty space. Just a low wall and rusted vents. My breath came in short, wet gasps. I could feel my body shaking, wet and cold. I gripped the flashlight with both hands, sweeping the roof. Shadows flickered, but there was no one, not physically, but I could feel a presence. Something patient, lingering in the corner of my vision, disappearing when I tried to focus. The echo of footsteps became a rhythm now, not random, not chaotic, intentional. Slow, 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 quick, quick. I stumbled back, hands slipping on wet tile, heart hammering, and for a moment, my mind betrayed me. I could swear I saw a figure step from the edge of the roof into the storm, blackened by rain. Features obscured and then vanish. Just like that. Gone. Lightning struck again, bright and violent, illuminating the entire roof for an instant. I saw nothing. Empty tiles. Empty vents. Only the endless gray sky and rain. But I couldn't shake the feeling. I was not alone. I pressed myself against the low wall, trying to calm, to breathe. The storm whipped at me, soaking, biting, chilling me to the bone. My pulse still thumped in my ears. The footsteps, they continued. Slow, intentional, echoing somewhere I couldn't find. I remembered the rumors of the hospital roof. Stories of people who swore they'd seen shadows moving above the ward, of echoes that weren't echoes, of steps that followed them when no one else was near. I had laughed at it before, but now, soaked and shivering, I realized those whispers were warnings. I had entered a space that refused to be empty. Another flash of lightning, another shadow, another movement at the edge of sight. I spun, light cutting through rain, and saw nothing. And yet, I knew there was something there, pacing, waiting, observing. My skin prickled. My teeth chattered. I tried to focus, to tell myself it was just the storm, that my mind was playing tricks after hours of walking these halls, of exploring empty rooms, of seeing the echoes of lives that once were. But no, this was different. There was intelligence here, awareness, something patient and deliberate, something that had learned me. The footsteps slowed, became singular, closer. I could hear a faint squish against wet tiles. A pause. My heart stopped in my chest. I spun, light slicing through rain, searching. Nothing. And then just at the edge of perception, I heard it. My own heartbeat. But not mine. A perfect mimic. Echoing, amplified. Surrounding me. pounding in rhythm with my own terrified pulse. I could feel it in my chest, vibrating in my bones. I stumbled back toward the hatch, slipping in the rain, soaked to the skin. My flashlight beam trembled across tiles and vents. Shadows flickered, dancing just beyond clarity. Another step. Not mine. Close. Too close. I climbed down as fast as I dared, wet boots slipping on metal grates. My hands were shaking, catching on the railing, slick with water. My mind raced. Don't fall. Don't look back. Just move. Just get inside. The roof loomed above me one last time, lightning illuminating it, empty and desolate. And yet, the echo of footsteps followed me down the stairwell. Not for long, but enough to make me believe. The hospital wasn't empty. It had never been empty. And the rain had a voice, a rhythm, a presence, waiting, patient, learning. Even now, as I sit in my dry apartment, listening to the rain on the windows, I can hear it in my mind. Slow, 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 quick, quick. The echo of footsteps that aren't mine. The pulse of something just out of sight. And I know I will never climb a rooftop in the rain again. The next morning, or what I thought was morning, the rain had stopped, but left behind a thick, clinging fog that wrapped around the hospital like a living thing. I stepped onto the rooftop again, heart still heavy from the storm, my boots squelching on puddles, and the city below blurred into a haze of gray. The storm had washed away the clarity of the streets, leaving only mist and shadows. At first, everything seemed empty, just me, the cold concrete, and the distant hum of the city muffled by fog. My wet clothes from the night before were still damp, chilling me to the bone, and I pulled my jacket tighter around my shoulders. I tried to shake off the sense that I was being watched, but I couldn't. Then I saw them. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks. Dark shapes perched on the ledges of the hospital's upper floors. Silent, unmoving, shrouded in mist. My flashlight, which I had brought more out of habit than necessity, trembled in my hands. I swung it toward them, and for a moment, the fog seemed to part just enough to catch their outlines. Human, almost human, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, and they moved, or seemed to, without a single step, gliding along ledges like shadows detached from reality. I swallowed hard, a lump forming in my throat. My pulse pounded in my ears. I wanted to look away, to convince myself it was imagination, but something kept my gaze locked, something patient, insistent. They didn't move while I watched, or maybe they moved too slowly to notice. The fog curled around them like a cloak, hiding their lower halves, making it impossible to tell how they stood, or even if they were standing at all. I blinked, and they were gone. My chest tightened, my mind reeled. Blink, and they vanished. The fog had swallowed them as if they had never existed. I forced myself to take a slow, deliberate step forward, trying to ground myself. It's just fog. It's just my eyes. Nothing's really there. Another blink. Another glimpse. Another figure on the far ledge. Watching. Waiting. Its head tilted slightly, as if curious, assessing me. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Wet hairs on my arms standing at attention. I wanted to speak, to break the tension, to prove that I was alive. Who's there? My voice sounded tiny in the vastness of fog and height. The mist swallowed the words instantly. No reply, only the figures, silent and still. I moved slowly along the roof, careful of slick tiles. Every step I took seemed to ripple through the fog, and I realized with a twinge of fear that the figures shifted subtly as I passed. Not quickly, not in any threatening way, just moving, always keeping distance, always lingering at the edge of perception. I tried to focus on one figure, a tall, thin shape perched near a broken vent. Its outline swayed slightly, almost imperceptibly. I could feel its gaze, though I couldn't see a face. And then, just as I leaned closer to get a better look, it vanished. No movement, no ripple, just gone. I stumbled back, my hand catching a rusted pipe for balance. My heart raced. The fog thickened suddenly, rolling across the roof in waves. Shapes flickered inside it. Hundreds, maybe thousands, tiny glimpses of dark forms that disappear when I try to focus. I shivered violently. The memory of last night's storm, the echoing footsteps, the shadows in the morgue, all returned at once. My pulse raced, and I realized with horror that these figures weren't random. They were patient. They were aware, and I was their audience. A new sound joined the silence. A faint scraping. Not heavy, not deliberate like footsteps, but soft like nails across concrete. I spun, flashlight beam cutting through the fog. Nothing but empty tiles, glistening with rain and distant city lights, muted and hazy. The figures reappeared. Not all at once. 1, 2, 3, perched along ledges I hadn't noticed before, peering at me through fog, so thick it blurred everything around them. Each blink, each glance shifted their positions. Sometimes they seemed closer, sometimes farther away, always watching, always patient. I could feel it then, a tightening in my chest. Not fear exactly, though fear was there, but the same presence I felt last night, that sense that the building itself, the rooftop, the fog, had awareness that these shapes were extensions of it. Guardians? Witnesses? Or something far older and stranger. I took another step, and the fog seemed to react. The air thickened, colder now, carrying with it a faint metallic tang. My flashlight beam caught one figure for a fraction of a second. Its head was cocked unnaturally, the contours of a face, or what I want to call a face, blurred by mist. It felt sad, empty, expectant. I forced myself to move, despite the trembling of my hands. I tried to ignore them, tried to convince myself that if I didn't look, they couldn't hurt me. But the instinct to watch, to track, was overwhelming. My eyes darted at every ledge, every shadowy corner, every curl of mist. Another blink. Gone. I pressed myself against the low wall of the rooftop, tried to catch my breath, trying to ground myself in reality. And that's when I noticed the rhythm. Not footsteps this time, not breathing, something subtler, a pattern in the fog, a pulse, almost imperceptible at first, like the roof itself was inhaling and exhaling. But then I realized it mirrored my heartbeat, slow, deliberate. The mist around the figures seemed to swell and recede with each beat, as though the fog itself were alive, breathing in sync with my fear. I wanted to run. I wanted to leap over the railing and escape into the mist below, into the blurred city streets. But the figures weren't going to let me leave. They never had. Their patience stretched like a wire, taut and unyielding, ready to snap if I moved too quickly. And then one step forward, or rather, it emerged. I don't know how to describe it. Not a step exactly. More like a slow slide, a bending of space, an intrusion into the clarity of the fog. It was taller than the rest, darker, denser, and it looked at me. I realized at the start that I could feel its gaze on my skin, a weight pressing down, insistent, intimate. My muscles tensed. I wanted to run. I couldn't. Lightning struck the horizon, illuminating the city in sharp, stark lines. I glimpsed the figures in full, dozens of them now, some perched, some sliding across tiles, some barely visible as wraiths in fog. All of them watching, waiting, expecting. I took a step back. One figure, my observer, moved closer. It didn't make a sound, didn't flicker, didn't vanish, just advanced, subtle, deliberate, like the fog itself were guiding it. The rain from last night had left everything wet, slippery, unstable. I stumbled, trying to keep distance. My flashlight beam wavered, reflecting off the tiles. The mist seemed thicker here, almost tactile, curling around my ankles, my legs, even my arms. I could feel it brushing my skin, cold and damp, like a presence itself. And then I heard a whisper, not audible, not real, but in my head, soft, insistent. We see you. We know you. I froze. My pulse raced. The figure paused, tilted its head, and then it vanished, not into the fog, into nothing. A tear in reality, almost. The mist remained, but the watcher was gone. I didn't stay to see if it returned. I turned, heart hammering, lungs burning, and made my way toward the stairwell. Each step I took was measured, deliberate, careful. The fog seemed to cling to my boots, the figures retreating but never fully gone. Watching, waiting, patient. As I descended, I could feel them above me, lingering along ledges, merging with fog, flickering in and out of perception. The storm had passed, the city below blurred and muted, but the rooftop, the mist, the watchers, none of it was gone. And even now, when I close my eyes, I can see them in the fog, just at the edge of sight, perched, waiting. I can feel their patience, their awareness, the pulse of the rooftop beneath them, and the echo of my own fear mirrored back at me, stretching the moments into hours, days, eternity. I don't know if I will go back up there, and yet a part of me is drawn to it, pulled by curiosity, by the compulsion to see, to watch, to witness, because they're still there, and they know. I told myself to breathe, to stay calm, but the fog had thickened to a point where it clung to my skin, my clothes, my hair. Every step I took on the rooftop felt like wading through a living thing. My boots slipped on the wet tiles, and the mist swirled around me like it was alive, curling and pressing in from all sides. Then I felt it, a hand, cold, wet, solid, impossible. It grabbed my wrist. My first instinct was to scream, but the storm of fog swallowed my voice before it even left my lips. My body froze. I couldn't move my arm. My heart thudded violently in my chest. My flashlight swung wildly in my other hand, slicing through the gray nothingness, and I could see nothing. Nothing but fog. Nothing but the endless gray. But the pressure on my wrist was real, solid, insistent. I tried to pull away. My muscles screamed, but the hand didn't budge. And then I realized I wasn't just being held. I was being dragged, slowly, irresistibly, toward the edge of the rooftop. I stumbled, slipping on the slick tiles, but the grip didn't loosen. My pulse raced. My mind screamed, "Fight! Fight! Fight!" But my legs didn't obey. The wind whipped at me, tearing my jacket, lashing my face with cold water. Lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the rooftop in stark flashes. In one brief instant, I thought I saw the hand, a shadowy thing, blacker than the fog, clawed at the tips. But then it vanished, and the grip remained. The hospital beneath me groaned, not like metal or concrete settling, not like the wind or storm. It groaned like a living thing, like it was inhaling me, pulling me down into itself. Every step I had taken so far seemed meaningless. The tiles shifted underfoot, subtly, almost imperceptibly, as if the building itself were bending toward me. My mind tried to rationalize. Maybe someone was playing a trick, someone with a rope, a prank, a hidden ladder. But no, the grip was too cold, too alive, too impossible. My stomach turned. My chest felt hollow, my lungs burning as I tried to scream again. No sound, only the sound of my own heartbeat, loud, echoing, mingling with the groan of the building. I fell, or maybe I didn't. That's the thing I can't remember clearly. There was a moment when gravity seemed to vanish, when the rooftop disappeared beneath me, leaving only fog. My body was weightless, suspended, and the hand held me firm, tugging, guiding, dragging. The mist around me shifted. Shapes swirled inside it. Figures from the ledges now multiplied dozens, maybe hundreds, faces just at the edge of sight, watching, waiting. The more I struggled, the closer they seemed to gather. Their forms shimmered in the fog, ephemeral and impossible, like shadows caught in some unnatural current. I tried to focus on the ground, or what I assumed was ground, but the fog distorted everything. Tiles stretched and twisted beneath my boots. The stairwell below, once familiar, now hung at impossible angles, defying logic. One moment it was close enough to leap toward, the next it stretched away, distant and unreachable. Panic surged. My lungs burned. My mind screamed for understanding, for reason, for escape. I clawed at the tiles, at the walls, at anything that felt solid. The hand held firm, pulling me farther, deeper into the fog. I felt my boots leave the surface entirely, my body tilting, spinning, twisting. I was falling, but the fall wasn't downward. It was sideways, backward, into nothing. The hospital groaned again, A low, deep sound vibrating through my bones. It was all around me now. The tiles, the walls, the fog, even the hand. The building itself seemed alive, stretching, bending, swallowing. I realized then that the hand might not belong to a person, or at least not to a person as I understood the term. The mist pressed against me from all sides. Shapes moved inside it. Faces thin and elongated, mouths open in silent screams. Arms reaching, twisting, grasping at me, though I couldn't tell which were real and which were figments. The hand that held me was solid, too deliberate. I tried to look down. My stomach lurched. There was nothing beneath me. Not fog, not rooftop, not air. Just a void, black and gray, pulsing as though the hospital had swallowed the sky. I was suspended between dimensions, between walls and nothingness, dragged by a force I could not comprehend. A whisper brushed my ear. Not a sound from the air, but inside my skull. Come. The voice was patient, coaxing, neither kind nor cruel, just insistent. Come. I screamed. My body reacted before my mind could stop it, thrashing, kicking, twisting. But the hand held firm. The fog twisted, swirled, and for a moment I saw the figures in clarity, or as much clarity as fog allows. They weren't human, not really. Limbs elongated, torsos bending in impossible angles, eyes black pits, faces blank except for anticipation, waiting, watching me struggle. Another tug. I felt my boots leave the last solid surface entirely. I was airborne, suspended in a gray void, the hand unyielding. And the hospital moaned, groaned, shook. The lights inside the building flickered, casting shadows across the fog, which moved as if responding to some hidden rhythm. I tried to scream again. My mouth opened. Nothing came out. The sound of the storm was gone, replaced by a deep, vibrating hum. It was not external, not auditory. It thrummed through my chest, my bones, my very being. The hand pulled again, stronger this time, and I felt my body stretching, bending unnaturally. I don't know how long this went on. Seconds? Minutes? Hours? Time lost meaning. I existed only as tension, as fear, as a body suspended between one world and another. The figures in the fog whispered in voices I couldn't fully recognize, calling my name, twisting it, merging it with syllables I had never spoken. Then the hand released, not gently, not entirely, just let go enough for me to tumble. My body twisted through the fog, landing on something. Tiles? Concrete? It felt real beneath me for a heartbeat, solid, but not safe. I lay there, gasping, soaked in mist, hands clutching at tiles, at rails, at nothing. The figures receded, or maybe I just blinked. The fog thickened again, swallowing them, hiding them from view. The hospital groaned one final time, a long, low sound that vibrated through everything. And then silence. I lay there, chest heaving, shivering, trying to catch my breath. The rooftop stretched out before me, empty now, just tiles slick with rain and fog curling at the edges. No hand, no figures, only the weight of what had just happened. I wanted to move, to climb down, to leave, to put as much distance between myself and this place as possible. But every step I took felt hesitant, fragile, like the tiles themselves might shift, like the fog might reach out again. And even now, hours later, sitting in a dry room with lights and walls and solid doors, I can feel it. The tug, the pull, the lingering weight of a hand that might have been real or might have been part of the hospital itself. The figures in the fog, watching, patient, eternal, and the knowledge that I was lucky to have survived or that I might not have. That somewhere in that mist, the hospital waits. Waits for me to return. Waits for me to stumble, to slip, to fall, or to be pulled. And I know, deep down, that if I ever step back onto that rooftop, I will not be the same. Or perhaps I will not return at all.